Chapter 2392 Level Skyrockets. With Shurfeng's command, Kola eagerly left to lure another Frostwolf chieftain. Meanwhile, the rest of the team got into their battle formations with just as much enthusiasm. Although they had reached Tier 3, most of them wore the same equipment they had when they had reached level 100. They didn't even have many pieces of level 100 fine gold equipment on them, much less level 100 dark gold equipment. They had obtained the majority of their level 100 fine gold equipment during their promotion quests. Their epic weapons and equipment might still have been useful at level 100, but the items hadn't grown any stronger after that point. As they continued to level up, these epic weapons and equipment pieces would become increasingly ineffective. If they could get their hands on level 105 fine gold set equipment now, not only would it significantly increase their basic attributes, but they'd also become strong enough to raid level 100 super large-scale team dungeons. Level 100 super large-scale team dungeons were a major turning point for God's Domain's dungeons because they dropped level 100 plus dark gold and epic ranked weapons and equipment. Most importantly, they dropped Tier 3 skill and spell books. They hadn't really understood the importance of skills and spells when they had been Tier 2 players, treating them as supplementary tools for combat. They had mainly relied on their basic attributes, combat techniques and combat standards in battle. However, they had realized that that ideology was no longer useful after reaching Tier 3. Tier 3 skills and spells were no less important than powerful combat techniques. With a player's mana body, Tier 3 skills and spells would display far more power than Tier 2 skills and spells ever could. This was why, despite their inferior combat standards, Tier 3 NPCs could so easily suppress Tier 3 players of the same level. It wasn't a matter of different basic attributes, but the difference in how many Tier 3 spells and skills one had. If they could learn a large number of Tier 3 skills and spells as well, their combat power would reach new highs. Even if they encountered Tier 3 experts with greater combat standards, they'd be able to defeat their opponents. Meanwhile, after fighting alongside the personal guards, Kola and his companions handled the second Frostwolf pack much easier than the first. This time they hadn't even needed to lure the Frostwolf chieftain away. They had simply bombarded the Grand Lord and its subordinates together. In the end, the team had annihilated the 200-plus Frostwolves in around a dozen minutes. Although the Frostwolf chieftain hadn't dropped any pieces of the Snowfrost set this time, it had dropped the gloves for the Frostwolf set, a 9-piece, level 105 fine gold set equipment for plate armor classes. When the team's plate armor classes saw the Frostwolf set's attributes, a passionate flame burned in their eyes. Crap. That's not fair. This Frostwolf set is so much better than the Snowfrost set. Its 6-piece set effect increases strength by 20% and the set's level limit to level 120. The full 9-piece set effect even upgrades the set by 1 rank. Blackie exclaimed. Nothing was more troublesome than obtaining level 100-plus weapons and equipment for Tier 3 experts like them. Based on the fact that the Frostwolf set could be used until level 120, the complete set ranked at the top even among level 100-plus dark gold set equipment. With the full Frostwolf set, a Tier 3 player would have the basic attributes to even rival ordinary Tier 3 NPCs. The Frostwolf set? Shurfeng was just as shocked when he saw the plate armor gloves that radiated a faint white glow. The Demonwolf mountain range's Frostwolf set had been quite famous in his previous life. It had been considered one of the top 10 level 120 dark gold set equipment in God's Domain. Even the various superpowers old monsters had coveted the set. However, the Frostwolf set was normally so rare that one could only obtain the pieces by killing the monsters in the Demonwolf mountain range's core, and yet it had dropped for his team in the inner region. This was unbelievable. Shurfeng's heart started to pound. He immediately instructed the team to hunt for more Frostwolf chieftains. If they could collect a few Frostwolf sets, they'd have no problems raiding level 100 super large-scale team dungeons. The team continued to grind for 7 consecutive days, during which they had practically killed every Frostwolf chieftain in the Demonwolf mountain range's inner region at least once. As a result, Shurfeng had risen from level 105 to 107, while his companions had leveled from 101 to 104. If the various superpowers experts discovered their leveling speed, they'd die from envy. Although the Frostwolves provided a lot of EXP, unfortunately the Frostwolf set's drop rate was quite low. Even after using Divine Providence before the killing blow, the team had only completed 3 Frostwolf sets. The team had also managed to collect 5 of the cloth armor Snow Frost sets and 5 of the leather armor Shadow Frost sets. Aside from the set equipment, the team had obtained over 1,000 pieces of level 100 and level 105 secret silver equipment, a bountiful harvest. They could now afford to gear a 100-man team fully. As for their quest's required mana, they had collected 956 strands in total. They were only a few dozen strands away from their target, and they should have no issues completing their quest in time. Meanwhile, the leasing auction for Stone Forest City's private houses had netted massive profits for Zero Wing. On average, each private house had been rented for 150,000 credits per week. After holding several leasing auctions, Zero Wing had earned over 1 billion credits in profit. Not only had this alleviated Zero Wing's desperate need for funds, but it had also allowed the Heaven's Rumble Training Center to set up quite a few virtual combat platforms in Fenglin City, which in turn enabled the guild to recruit more capable internal members. Guild leader, when will you be done with your quest? Recently, Starlink has been expanding rapidly. It also has support from Demon Palace now. Not only has it recruited plenty of experts, but we're seeing more players ambush our members in the fields. Many of the Dark Knight Empire's powers have also chosen to side with Starlink. Our members are even too afraid to set foot in a neutral map, and to make matters worse, the situation has started to affect our development in Starmoon Kingdom, Liang Jing reported, clearly frustrated. Although they had lured many experts into joining the Starmoon Adventurer Alliance with the Crimson Sunsets, Starlink had countered this by offering even greater benefits. Now, members of Starlink's Adventurer Alliances could purchase the Demonic Hellworld Special Legacy for far cheaper. The new benefit had attracted many experts. As a result, Starlink had effectively restricted Zero Wing's resource income, which limited the guild members' leveling efficiency since they needed those materials to brew potions and craft special tools that were essential for grinding in high-level neutral maps. Although Zero Wing could purchase these materials through the Secret Chamber of Commerce, it needed coins to do so, which was by no means a worthwhile trade. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. I understand. I'm almost done here. If we need coins, start leasing Stone Forest City's private houses for coins rather than credits. That should give us enough to hold out for some time, Shifeng decided after giving the matter some thought. I'll return as soon as I've finished my quest. Liang Jing had no choice but to nod and follow Shifeng's instructions. While Shifeng had conversed with Liang Jing, an abandoned ancient magic array lit with a colorful brilliance in a forbidden land on the eastern continent. As the rainbow of lights faded, several figures emerged from the magic array. Despite the very thin mana in the forbidden land, a dense layer of mana enveloped these several individuals. In fact, due to their arrival, the surrounding mana density had substantially increased. So, this is the eastern continent. Chapter 2393, Demonwolf Mountain Range's Secret Demonwolf Mountain Range, Howling Wind Canyon. Shifeng and his team stood on the mountainside, fighting fervently to fend off a large pack of demon wolves coming up from the foot of the mountain. This pack was larger than any of the Frostwolf packs they had encountered before, with thousands of members. Moreover, every demon wolf was level 110 or higher, including level 114 demon wolves. Many of these beasts were great lords, and there were a few grand lords in the pack. None of the team members could afford to rest lest the demon wolf pack overwhelmed them. If not for the fine gold guards blocking the only path up the mountain, and Anna using a magic array to suppress the demon wolves, these beasts would have devoured Shifeng and his team long ago. Guild leader, this is an amazing place to grind. Pack after pack of these demon wolves are running at us. Our leveling speed here is even faster than when we were grinding frost wolves, Blackie said, grinning when he saw another pack of demon wolves approach the foot of the mountain. I bet we can even reach level 105 in less than a day of grinding here. Compared to when they had grinded frost wolves, their current leveling speed was on an entirely different level. They had invested a lot of time in their hunt for frost wolves, but they didn't need to chase down demon wolves, which regularly called for reinforcements. They simply needed to station the melee fine gold guards on the front line while the rest of the team attacked from a safe distance. These beasts are at least level 110. If we stay here, we can maintain our leveling speed until we reach the same level. If we do, we won't even have to fear the various superpowers experts when they catch up to tier 3, Yan Tianxing said, his eyes glowing with excitement. It was true that Zero Wing had gained a massive advantage when they had reached Tier 3 so early, but Xianxia understood that the various superpowers had far more and stronger experts than his guild. Zero Wing's advantage over the various superpowers was only temporary. Once the superpowers experts finished their promotion quests as well, Zero Wing would be at a disadvantage. He had constantly been concerned about this. Zero Wing's feud with Starlink was still happening, and the various powers invading from the other worlds couldn't be underestimated. Every one of these powers was eyeing the resources in level 100 neutral maps in Stone Forest City. However, this expedition had alleviated some of his concerns. After reaching Tier 3 in God's domain, the basic attributes players earned with each level up wouldn't have as much of an impact on a player's performance as it used to. Rather, weapons, equipment, and combat standards would have a more prominent effect on players' combat power. However, by leveling up quickly, Zero Wing's peak experts would have more time for high-ranked quests, which would allow them to upgrade their weapons, equipment, and combat standards sooner. With a level advantage, they had a chance of contending with the various superpowers experts and stabilizing Zero Wing's position. How can a level 100 neutral map have such a wonderful place? Shifeng said, chuckling when he saw his teammates' passionate expressions after Xianxia had mentioned the possibility of reaching level 110 so soon. There's no lack of monsters in this area, but remaining here will be taxing on our stamina and concentration. We can't stay for too long. Shifeng had already known about this area and its Demonwolves, but he hadn't led the team here earlier because of the atmosphere's burden on players' stamina and concentration. Considering those factors, their grinding efficiency here wasn't that much better than grinding Frostwolf packs. Moreover, the Frostwolves dropped better loot than Demonwolves. However, Zero Wing's current predicament wouldn't permit him to remain in the Demonwolf mountain range for long, which had led to his decision to grind the Demonwolves. The team members couldn't help but glance at their stamina and concentration gauges, and just as Shifeng had warned them, they noticed that they were consuming twice as much as they had while grinding Frostwolves. They really wouldn't be able to fight the Demonwolves for very long. Of course, the environment here isn't all bad. It does increase our stamina and concentration consumption rates, but it is also the perfect pace to adapt to our mana bodies and train with our Tier 3 skills and spells. You'll rarely find such an opportunity elsewhere, Shifeng said, smiling when he saw everyone's disappointment. The Demonwolf mountain range was no ordinary forbidden land. It was a prized location for players to train after reaching Tier 3, especially since it was infested with berserk Demonwolves. Not only was the map full of chaotic energy which was much stronger here, but that energy also disrupted mana. It was the perfect situation to help players adapt to their mana bodies. The mana body was the biggest difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3. The mana body could also be referred to as a player's mana pool. Players with mana bodies controlled mana in an entirely different way than players without. At Tier 2, players used the ambient mana to power their skills and spells, but once they reached Tier 3, they'd use the mana inside themselves as well. This was why Tier 3 skills and spells were so much more powerful than those at Tier 2. However, using the mana within one's body wasn't easy. Players would need a certain level of understanding of their own mana body. Meanwhile, players would struggle to use the ambient mana in environments with chaotic energy, and as such they'd be forced to rely on the mana within them. This was why such environments were so helpful to players as they adapted to their mana bodies. Indeed, I can sense my mana a little more clearly now. The effects aren't as apparent, but I'm finding it easier to use my own mana now, Elofe said. After she had reached Tier 3, something had felt wrong when she had cast her Tier 3 spells, but she had brushed it off, assuming it was simply due to how unfamiliar she was with her Tier 3 physique. However, it seemed that sense of wrongness had been a result of her lack of control with her mana body, which had limited her ability to cast her Tier 3 spells. When the rest of the team realized this, they adjusted their approach as they attacked the charging Demonwolves. They started to focus on their own mana while they attacked, using this opportunity to adapt. After 2 hours of practice, the team saw significant improvements to their completion rates with their Tier 3 skills and spells. On average, the team members increased their completion rates by 4%, enough to push many of them across the 80% threshold. Elofe, Zhao Yueru, and Alluring Summer improved the most, with all three reaching past an 85% spell completion rate. Everyone on the team grew ecstatic. They had never realized that the Howling Wind Canyon would be such an extraordinary training ground. Even Shifeng managed to learn some new tricks. He had only had a bronze-ranked mana body in the past, and now that he had an epic mana body, the way he conducted mana had changed. Inspired, he could now manipulate his body with greater precision. He even gained a new understanding of his physical control in the real world. By the time the team only needed 19 more mana strands, Kola and his companions had reached level 105, crossing the first minor threshold past level 100. Without hesitation, Shifeng handed the 3 Frostwolf sets to Kola, Turtledove, and Shadow Sword, which gave the 3 a large boost to their basic attributes. The defense and basic attributes are so high. I feel like I can even tank a level 110 mythic monster now, Kola exclaimed as he examined his newfound strength. Shifeng also gave the Frost Shadow and Snow Frost sets to Xianxia and the rest. With their new equipment, these players' basic attributes were only slightly lower than those of ordinary Tier 3 NPCs. Armed with appropriate equipment, the team slew the incoming Demonwolves far faster than before. As a result, they collected mana at a much faster rate. Guild leader, my group is almost out of stamina and concentration, Blackie announced, sounding tired. My group's running out of gas as well, Xianxia added. Although the team members all had high-ranked mana bodies, they couldn't completely resist the effects of the violent mana in the area. If players with a bronze mana body tried to take their place, they would have run out ages ago. Let's retreat for now since everyone's exhausted, Shifeng decided after seeing that they only needed 3 more mana strands to complete their quest. They could easily collect the rest on their way back to Alba Grey. Shifeng then retrieved the Crimson Dragon flying ship for everyone to board and rest. Once they boarded, the team found rooms to rest in and logged out of the game. Meanwhile, Shifeng piloted the flying ship back to the Demonwolf mountain range's outer area. Once he had reached the safety of the outer area, Shifeng received a call request from Liang Jing. Has Starlink done something again? Shifeng asked. It hadn't been long since the last time she had called. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. There's nothing new from Starlink, but I just received a message from Chairman Xiao regarding a problem in the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. He says that a group of people has shown up demanding a challenge, and they've already injured quite a few of our advanced disciples, Liang Jing said. Challengers? Shifeng asked. Has Master Lei Bao not taken care of them? The Heaven's Rumble Training Center had no lack of challenges since so many people wanted to use Heaven's Rumble as a stepping stone to earn fame in Fenglin City overnight. However, Shifeng normally let Xiao Yu and Lei Bao take care of these issues. I've heard that Master Lei Bao lost in just 3 moves. Chairman Xiao only contacted me after he had run out of options, Liang Jing said. They even defeated Lei Bao? The news surprised Shifeng. Who is the challenger? Since he had begun training with Zero Wing, Lei Bao had grown considerably stronger. Even among Apex internal force experts, few were his match. No one knows, and the training center is in an uproar over it. Chairman Xiao is hoping that you can send Fire Dance to take care of this, Liang Jing said. No need. I'll visit the training center myself, Shifeng said, shaking his head. Fire Dance and the others were still in the midst of their Tier 3 promotion quest, so leaving their virtual gaming cabins wasn't convenient right now. Moreover, Shifeng was curious to find out who was strong enough to defeat Lei Bao. Chapter 2394, Powerful Assault Fenglin City, Heaven's Rumble Training Center. As Shifeng arrived at Heaven's Rumble Training Center's top-floor training hall, he was greeted by the sight of a large number of people. They were split into 2 groups, a large group of Heaven's Rumble's disciples and a smaller group of 3 men and 2 women. The training center's members wore tense expressions as they stared at the smaller group on the opposite side of the hall in fear. The 3 men and 2 women appeared quite young. The oldest didn't look like he had even reached 30, while the youngest of these strangers seemed to be in their early 20s. However, these 5 visitors' auras made them stand out. The eldest of the group, a man with even more bulk than Feng Mingyu, the strongest member of the Feng family's younger generation, felt like a volcano. When Shifeng entered the hall, everyone's attention shifted to him. Hall Master, Lei Bao greeted Shifeng with an apologetic expression. Shifeng had requested that Lei Bao serve as the Heaven's Rumble Training Center's acting Hall Master and continued to supply training resources. The older man had even received quite a few bottles of S-rank nutrient fluids, And yet, a bunch of youngsters had defeated him in 3 moves, and he had been forced to request Shifeng's presence. "How are your injuries?" Shifeng asked, noticing that Lei Bao seemed a bit weaker than normal. "It's nothing serious, just a few minor sprains. I'll be fine after some rest," Lei Bao said. "However, you should be careful. These people aren't ordinary fighters, especially the young man leading the group. His strength is inhuman. He even took my full-powered punch and avoided injury." At this point, Lei Bao was shocked and afraid of the gorilla-like youth leading the small group of visitors. He was extraordinarily strong. Not even a neutralizing grandmaster could take his full-powered hit and emerge unscathed. However, when he had punched that youth, it had felt as if he had hit a steel wall. While Lei Bao informed Shifeng of the recent events, the young woman in a red dress beside the gorilla youth walked over. "We meet again, Hall Master Shi," the young woman said, smiling faintly. "I hadn't had the chance to introduce myself the last time we met. My name is Feng Shihan, one of mythology's vice guild leaders. I am also the Qilin Corporation's representative. I've come to negotiate a partnership." Mythology. Liang Jing stared at the young woman with wide eyes. Liang Jing was no longer a stranger to the virtual gaming world. After joining Zero Wing, she had thoroughly researched both the virtual gaming world and God's domain in particular. She knew about mythology, one of the 5 great super guilds in the virtual gaming world. Mythology stood at the apex of the virtual gaming world. However, Liang Jing had never dreamed that the Feng family would have connections with the super guild. Even Shifeng gave Feng Shihan a surprised look. However, he wasn't surprised to hear about mythology, but because he had never heard about Feng Shihan being one of the super guild's vice guild leaders during his previous life. "Partnership? What kind of partnership?" Shifeng asked. "Mythology's influence in God's domain goes without saying, and I'm sure you can see for yourself the guild's training capabilities," Feng Shihan said as she gestured to the gorilla of a man behind her. Smiling, she continued, "Mythology intends to develop on the eastern continent, and of the various guilds on that side of God's domain, we've deemed that Zero Wing has the most potential. We only require 51% of Zero Wing's shares, and in exchange the Qilin Corporation will provide capital, while Mythology will provide further training for Heaven's Rumble's members. We'll help your training center rise to fame, which will allow Zero Wing to recruit more talented members." "And if I refuse?" Shifeng asked. "I'm afraid that isn't up to you, Hall Master Shi," Feng Shihan said nonchalantly. "I know that you've recently become a neutralizing grandmaster and have successfully blocked one of my father's full-powered blows, so I'm sure you're quite confident in your strength. I'm also sure that you're confident that no fighter in Fenglin City can defeat you. But your strength is nothing before mythology." As soon as Feng Shihan said that, the gorilla youth behind her stepped forward, the intensity of his aura skyrocketing. His muscles bulged, tearing his shirt to reveal the dark copper skin underneath. The youth's aura became twice as strong, and the cold killing intent he radiated even made Lei Bao shudder. "A Henglian Grandmaster!" Lei Bao exclaimed. Training in the Henglian style was already exceptionally difficult, and very few people became Henglian masters. However, once someone mastered the style, they'd even be able to hold their ground against a neutralizing grandmaster. Lei Bao had only heard of Henglian grandmasters before. He could never have guessed that the young man before him, who hadn't even reached 30, would be a Henglian grandmaster. No, his aura doesn't feel complete. He should still be half a step away from becoming a grandmaster, Shifeng calmly stated after observing the gorilla youth for a moment. "As expected of a neutralizing grandmaster, you have keen senses," Feng Shihan said, smiling. "No, Matt isn't a Henglian grandmaster. He's not quite mentally developed enough for that yet, but he'll have no issue taking on ordinary neutralizing grandmasters. Do you still refuse to cooperate, Hall Master Shi?" She had investigated Zero Wing thoroughly with a focus on Stone Forest City. As a city in a level 100 neutral map, it was a treasure trove. Once she had learned about that fact, she had become resolved to obtain Zero Wing no matter the cost. With Stone Forest City under her control, she could rise through mythology's ranks. When he heard Feng Shihan's statement, Xiao Yu began to despair. He hadn't realized the Feng family was powerful enough to elicit the help of a half-step Henglian grandmaster. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although Matt wasn't an actual Henglian Grandmaster, he'd have an overwhelming advantage over ordinary neutralizing Grandmasters in an official competition. If Shi Feng lost to the older man, the Heaven's Rumble Training Center would be finished. He was the reason that the training center had grown to its current size and fame. If Shi Feng were defeated, Heaven's Rumble would lose everything. Liang Jing watched the exchange with a grim expression as well. Zero Wing required the Heaven's Rumble Training Center to recruit talented members. Losing it would be a major hindrance to Zero Wing's development. I won't make this too difficult for you, kid. I'll accept defeat if you can last 3 hits. If you can't, then you'll hand over Zero Wing's shares, Matt declared before his fist shot toward Shi Feng. Chapter 2395. Three Palms. Matt's sudden attack surprised everyone in the hall. Sure enough, he can't help himself. Feng Shihan pitied Shi Feng when she noticed Matt's attack. Matt was incredibly talented, and after working with the Hell training system, the Lastest training system mythology had created, his already violent tendencies had become more prominent. Now he was a combat maniac. Even in mythology, there were few people who could spar with Matt. With a neutralizing Grandmaster before him, the man was naturally eager to spar with Shi Feng. He had recently gotten closer to becoming a Henglian Grandmaster and hadn't had the chance to test his strength properly. Before Shi Feng made his decision was the best opportunity for Matt to force the younger man into a fight. Although stopping Matt wasn't impossible, Feng Shihan thought it was necessary for Shi Feng to experience mythology's power. Lei Bao, who stood by Shi Feng's side, felt stifled when he saw Matt's punch. This strike was completely different than the hits Matt had used during their fight. Not only did this punch break the sound barrier, but it also seemed impossible to avoid. Lei Bao thought he could even hear the Grim Reaper call his name. However, just as Matt's hit was about to land, Shi Feng casually took a half step back and rotated his right shoulder as if he had expected the attack. Almost as if an invisible barrier had manifested between them, Matt's punch harmlessly stopped a few centimeters away from Shi Feng's shoulder. What? Did I scare you? Matt quipped when Shi Feng hadn't made another move to stop him. What happened to all of your confidence? Matt was only a half-step Henglian Grandmaster, and although he was more physically fit than ordinary neutralizing Grandmasters, his mental processing couldn't compare. His senses and reaction speed were just as inferior to that of a neutralizing Grandmaster. If a neutralizing Grandmaster focused on evading his attacks, Matt would be helpless against them. In fact, if Lei Bao, a peak internal force master, had focused on evasion, their fight would have lasted a lot longer. This was why Matt had deliberately challenged Shi Feng to last 3 of his punches. Otherwise, fighting Shi Feng would be a waste of time. Forget it, Matt. Hall Master Shi can't take your hits. I suggest you face each other in a race. At least that will give Hall Master Shi a chance at victory, the tall, short-haired woman behind Feng Shihan ridiculed. The woman's provocation enraged Heaven's Rumble's disciples. Even veteran neutralizing Grandmasters couldn't help to match a half-step Henglian Grandmaster's physical fitness, much less Shi Feng, who had only recently become a neutralizing Grandmaster. Asking Shi Feng to take a direct hit from Matt was a joke. Xiao Yu began to move forward to advise Shi Feng against falling into the woman's trap. If he fell for it and lost against Matt, Heaven's Rumble's reputation would be in tatters. I never said I wasn't interested. I just don't think those terms are fair, Shi Feng said, shaking his head. I have to sell Zero Wing's shares if you win, yet you'll just pack up and leave if you lose. What benefit do I get for accepting this challenge? That's simple. Head Instructor Shi, if you win, I'll give Zero Wing a 300 million loan, plus state-of-the-art training equipment for the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. I can guarantee that the equipment I have to offer rivals that in the country's top dojos and training centers, Feng Shihan declared, her lips curling into a wicked grin. She reacted as if she had been expecting Shi Feng to ask. State-of-the-art training equipment? Xiao Yu's eyes glowed when he heard this. 300 million credits would be a massive boon to the Heaven's Rumble Training Center, but the state-of-the-art equipment would be far more important. The equipment Feng Shihan offered might not be worth 300 million credits, but it was impossible to purchase on the market. Only the supplier's partners had any access. In comparison, the best equipment available to the public was 2 generations behind, which was why ordinary training centers and dojos' disciples couldn't hold a candle to those from top dojos and training centers. If the Heaven's Rumble Training Center could get its hands on this equipment, its facilities would undergo a qualitative transformation. In turn, this would make the training center more attractive to far more people. Shifeng didn't respond immediately, however. What? You're still not satisfied? Feng Shihan chuckled at Shifeng's silence. If that's not enough, state your demands, head instructor Shi. She already had a good grasp on Heaven's Rumble Training Center's situation. Although Lei Bao normally led the training center and Heaven's Rumble's members received excellent training, it was nothing compared to the nation's top dojos and training centers, particularly when it came to its training facilities. If Heaven's Rumble acquired state-of-the-art equipment, its facilities would be an excellent promotional tool on their own, luring in far more members. Shifeng had no reason to reject her offer. Zero Wing desperately needed manpower after all. Feng Shihan assumed that the only reason Shifeng hadn't jumped at her offer was that he wasn't confident in withstanding Matt's punches. Knowing this, she wouldn't give the younger man any excuses to refuse her challenge. Everyone in the hall thought the same. They had already witnessed Matt's power. Everyone would be impressed if Shifeng remained standing after taking a single hit, let alone 3. Since Miss Feng has asked, I only have one condition, Shifeng said, smiling. He must withstand 3 of my palm strikes as well. If you win, Zero Wing will sell its shares. If I win, I want 20 bottles of life potion. For a moment, shocked silence filled the training hall. Are you insane? The tall woman behind Feng Shihan blurted, staring at Shifeng. Hall master. Even Lei Bao gave the younger man an incredulous look. Henglian-style practitioners were not famed for their strength, but for their frightening defense. It was why a Henglian master would dare to fight a neutralizing grandmaster, yet refuse to acknowledge Apex internal force masters. Matt was only a half step away from reaching grandmaster status in the Henglian style, and as such his skin and bones were as solid as steel. Trying to injure him with human strength was an utter joke. Only bullets could break though his hide now. 20 life potions? Feng Shihan frowned. Life potions weren't like S-rank nutrient fluids. They contained an extraordinary amount of life force. Consuming 1 bottle of life potion would restore youth to an ordinary person, and the potions were in high demand among grandmaster martial artists. Even a major corporation like Qilin Corporation could only secure a small number of bottles. Despite being the Qilin Corporation's princess, Feng Shihan didn't even get that many life potions per year. If Miss Feng thinks this condition is too demanding, we can forget about this challenge, Shifeng mused, chuckling. Neither the credits nor the state-of-the-art equipment was a priority for Zero Wing and Heaven's Rumble right now. The organizations would only truly be able to develop further by improving the strength of their current combatants. The life potion was undoubtedly one of the quickest ways for Zero Wing and Heaven's Rumble to do so. As long as Zero Wing and Heaven's Rumble became strong enough in the future, obtaining state-of-the-art was entirely possible if they were willing to spend a little money, but that wasn't the case for the life potions. They were truly rare items. Not even Lu Xingluo, the Starline Corporation's heir, could acquire many life potions, much less Shifeng. Fine. I agree to your condition. Feng Shihan hissed. Smiling, she continued, but remember, you only have 3 palm strikes. Of course. Shifeng nodded. You really think you can win, kid? Grinning, Matt said, even if I stood here and let you hit me 20 times, you couldn't force me to take a single step back, much less 3. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, before Matt could say anything more, Shifeng walked up to him and thrust out his palm. The strike looked light and gentle from an outsider's perspective. It didn't look like it had the power to threaten anyone. That thrust didn't even look like it could injure an ordinary passerby, let alone Matt. However, just as Shifeng's palm was about to connect with his target, the movement changed, leaving 3 afterimages in its wake. But a dull sound echoed throughout the hall, and Matt's face lost color until his complexion was a deathly pale. He stumbled 3 steps back, clutching his abdomen as he fell to his knees, unable to speak for a long moment. Chapter 2396. Initial display of strength. As Matt knelt, silence momentarily enveloped the entire training hall. The tall woman with short hair in particular wore a stiff expression, her mocking words forgotten. Impossible. Matt, what happened? Mythology's members were dumbfounded by their comrade's reaction. They were all quite familiar with Matt's strength and defense, but they also knew his personality. Thus they knew this wasn't an act. Shifeng's palm strike had looked gentle. It hadn't even seemed powerful enough to injure an ordinary person, much less a Henglian expert like Matt. Yet after taking the hit, Matt had collapsed with his pale face twisted in pain. The strike had clearly left him with substantial injuries. Even Lei Bao and Heaven's Rumble's disciples gaped in shock, not to mention Feng Shihan's group. What did the Hall Master do? Heaven's Rumble disciples were confused. They had already witnessed Matt's strength earlier, when he had defeated Lei Bao in 3 moves. The man had such high defense that he had taken a full-powered blow from Lei Bao without issue, and yet he couldn't cope with one of Shifeng's gentle palm strikes. Did that guy use some hidden weapon, Vice Guild Leader? How else would he have hurt Matt? A male youth who was as large as Feng Mingyu quietly asked Feng Shihan. Aside from the old instructor who wasn't in the hall, the strongest of Heaven's Rumble's visitors were Matt and Feng Shihan. Since Matt couldn't speak at that moment, only Feng Shihan could inform her companions of what Shifeng had done. The rest of Mythology's group nodded, agreeing with the male youth. They assumed that Shifeng must have cheated. No. He didn't just attack with 1 strike, but 3 instantaneous palm strikes, Feng Shihan said, watching Shifeng with an indescribably grim expression. Moreover, all 3 strikes hit the same location, so it looked like a single attack. His physical control has already reached the spiritualization realm. 3 palm strikes. How is that possible? Their leader's answer stunned Mythology's members. Ignoring the difficulty of striking the same location multiple times, executing 3 simultaneous attacks was an unbelievable feat. They couldn't even fathom what kind of mental and physical reaction speed one would need to accomplish it. That's right, I executed 3 palm strikes as agreed, Shifeng said, not bothering to hide the truth. He was a little surprised to see Matt so pale, however. Not only does combining 3 attacks allow me to increase my raw power, but it also doubles my hits penetrating power. To think you only received minor injuries, I'm impressed with your muscular defense. If you had come here a few days ago, I really wouldn't have been a match for you. Adjusting to his epic mana body in the Howling Wind Canyon had inspired him. After he had become a neutralizing grandmaster in the real world, his mind had begun to secrete hormones to fortify his physical prowess. His mental and physical reaction speeds in particular had significantly improved, but superior reaction speed wasn't enough for him to exhibit his full strength. His physical control wasn't yet perfect. However, by controlling the flow of mana in his epic mana body, he had come up with some combat techniques that would rely on his reaction speed. Although he couldn't replicate these techniques perfectly in the real world, he was able to exhibit a fraction of the technique's power. Even that fraction greatly increased his strength and penetrating power, allowing him to drive the force of his strikes toward Matt's organs. Not even an adult bear would escape such an attack unscathed. Although Matt was in incredible shape, he was only human. Once his pain had subsided to a bearable level, Matt stood, glaring at Shifeng with a hint of fear in his gaze. He abandoned any thought of fighting the younger man. Very good. I've lost this challenge. Henglian-style practitioners were famed for their brute strength and defense. The only reason that they dared to clash with neutralizing grandmasters was their ability to take a hit without sustaining significant injuries. On the other hand, if they got lucky and landed a bow, they could knock out their opponent with a single hit. However, they'd have to flee from a neutralizing grandmaster like Shifeng, who could ignore their defense. Fighting such an individual would only spell their death. Still, the situation confused Matt. Aside from Shifeng, he had only ever taken such a serious blow from his old instructor. His instructor was an old monster who had become a neutralizing grandmaster several decades ago. The old instructor had also received help from plenty of state-of-the-art and medication to grow stronger. His strength had long since reached inhuman levels. In comparison, Shifeng was only in his early 20s. Just how did this young man become so powerful? In that case, will you fulfill your end of the bargain, Miss Feng? Shifeng asked after Matt had admitted defeat. After his fight with Matt, Shifeng's mind spun. It wasn't because he had successfully executed a god's domain combat technique in the real world, but because of how impressed he was with Mythology's expert standards. He had never thought Mythology would be this powerful. If even Mythology could nurture such incredible fighters, other superpowers shouldn't be far behind. More than anything, Shifeng needed a large stock of life potions to nurture his own fitness, as well as help Lei Bao and Fire Dance become neutralizing grandmasters. Otherwise, Zero Wing's operations in the real world would be in grave danger. The three palms, one strike technique might have looked simple, but it was extremely hard to execute. If Shi Feng hadn't mentally prepared himself and Matt hadn't simply stood there to take the hit, he wouldn't have been able to execute the technique. I don't have 20 life potions on me right now, but I'll have someone deliver them to you before the end of tomorrow, Feng Shihan said, frowning. Shi Feng's strength had drastically exceeded her expectations. He certainly couldn't be considered an ordinary neutralizing grandmaster. We have other matters to tend to, so we will take our leave for now. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After saying so, Feng Shihan left with her subordinates and Shi Feng didn't try to stop her. Feng Shihan was the Qilin Corporation's princess. She couldn't afford to break a promise she made in public. After Feng Shihan's group left, cheers broke out in the training hall as the disciples celebrated. Everyone practically worshipped Shi Feng's display, which had renewed their confidence in the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. Some of the normal members even considered applying to become true Heaven's Rumble disciples. However, the atmosphere in the luxury maglev car parked outside of the training center wasn't as cheerful. We're just going to leave, Vice Guild Leader? I know we only came here to test Heaven's Rumble's standards, but wasn't our main goal to compete with the training center virtually and steal its virtual combat platforms in Fenglin City? Shi Feng might be strong, but it'll be a different story when we fight in a virtual combat platform. Not even Zero Wing's Black Flame will be a match for you with your strength as a Tier 3 player, much less Shi Feng, Matt complained. No. We need to report this to the old instructor, Feng Shihan said, shaking her head. No matter how you look at it, it's strange for someone as young as Shi Feng to be so powerful. I'm sure there's some big secret to his strength. If we can discover this secret, we'll gain far more authority in mythology. It might even be enough for me to become one of the headquarters' 3 great Vice Guild leaders. Chapter 2397, Ascension Realm. Fenglin City, Redstone Restaurant. Feng Shihan and her entourage stood before a man in one of the Redstone restaurant's VIP rooms, which had an antique flair. The man sat cross-legged on the floor with his eyes closed. Despite the fact that half of the man's hair had already turned white, his facial features were that of a man in his early 40s. In truth, however, he was already over 70. Although this elderly man wasn't as large or robust as Matt and the others, his aura felt like that of an unshakable mountain. Standing in his presence, one couldn't help but revere the old man. This man was none other than Situ Qingtian, Feng Shihan and her companion's instructor. Matt, is Shi Feng truly as powerful as Shihan described? Was he really able to combine the power of his attacks? Situ Qingtian asked as he opened his eyes and looked at the younger man before him. I'm sure of it. The moment after the first hit, his strike's penetrating power doubled. If I hadn't reacted quickly enough and diverted some of the force, he would have likely knocked me out, Matt said, nodding. Before today he had only ever experienced that level of power from Situ Qingtian, and the memory of Shi Feng's hits were still fresh in his mind. Instructor, I investigated Shi Feng thoroughly, and there were no reports of him possessing this kind of strength. He's only recently reached the Grandmaster realm and partially enhanced his mental capacity. He must have found something in God's domain that has allowed him to execute such a technique in the real world, Feng Shihan surmised. It seems Zero Wing isn't so simple after all. I must have many secrets, Situ Qingtian said. I suspect this Shi Feng has made considerable progress in the realms of truth. He's likely reached the Ascension realm at the very least. The Ascension realm? How is that possible? Matt exclaimed. Mythology had discovered the realms of truth combat system, which had profound principles in God's domain. At first, some of the various superpowers had labeled the realms of truth as the spiritualization realm, and they had discovered that learning these principles allowed one to gain unbelievable control with combat techniques. Learning these principles was akin to engraving combat techniques on one's bones. Players that learn these principles and practice them successfully could execute a combat technique with every movement. They could exhibit strength far beyond their natural potential. However, progressing through the realms of truth was an intense challenge. Even Matt, a genius, had barely begun, yet he was considered one of the most accomplished individuals in mythology. And now they discovered that Shi Feng, who was much younger than Matt, had gone beyond, reaching the Ascension realm. How could he allow himself to believe it? That is why I am sure Zero Wing has hidden many secrets. Mythology has expended a lot of manpower and resources to explore the realms of truth, yet we have barely uncovered some of the training methods, Xianxia said, his interest in Zero Wing growing. Zero Wing must have obtained some clues relating to the realms of truth and uncovered detailed training methods. No individual could reach such a standard by themselves, otherwise. If that is true, we must obtain this secret. Feng Shihan declared, passion burning in her gaze. Mythology had constantly been searching for the realms of truth secrets, but the clues they had uncovered were few and vague. Needless to say, they had yet to discover any systematic training methods. If she could get her hands on Zero Wing's training system and combine it and Mythology's research, not only could she improve her own combat standards, but she could also gain more authority within the guild. Vice Guild Leader, Zero Wing's roots on the eastern continent are too solid to shake right now, especially now that it has Stone Forest City. I'm afraid that we won't be able to cause any significant damage. Even if we target the Heaven's Rumble Training Center, our results will likely be negligible. At worst, we'll slow Zero Wing's recruitment rate, but we won't be able to harm the guild's foundations directly, Matt anxiously said. He desperately wanted a Realms of Truth training system as well. If he could progress further through the Realms of Truth, not only would he grow stronger in God's domain, but he'd also gain more combat power in the real world. Don't worry about it. Since we now know Zero Wing has obtained clues regarding the Realms of Truth, our guild will not let it out of our sight. I've read through the reports on Zero Wing. It seems the guild is at war with Starlink, and the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's Phoenix Rain is part of the reason it has held on for so long, Xianxia calmly stated. If we can interfere and prevent Phoenix Rain from helping Zero Wing, I doubt the guild will last long against Starlink. Shihan, visit the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion and inform Ku Rong of our stance. I'm sure that old fellow will make the wise decision. I understand. I'll get it done once I return, Feng Shihan said, nodding. She had thought of pressuring the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion too, but she was only a vice guild leader from one of Mythology's many branch guilds. Although she had a good reputation in the guild, she had no authority to represent the guild in crucial matters. Now that she had permission, however, she didn't have to worry about any negative repercussions. Whether or not the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion would give in to her demands wasn't even a question. Mythology was one of the 5 great super guilds in God's domain. Even ordinary super guilds had to show it respect, not to mention a super first-rate guild like the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion. Meanwhile, in Zero Wing's main headquarters, once Shi Feng received the 20 bottles of life potion from Feng Shihan's subordinate, he gave 3 bottles to Lei Bao. He instructed the man to visit the extraordinary tower with the berserker Lei Bao had made for fun in God's domain. After his fight with Matt, Shi Feng had an odd sense of impending danger. Although Zero Wing was developing smoothly in God's domain, it was far too weak in the real world, especially when it came to poaching talented fighters. The various superpowers had already begun to do so on a large scale. However, since Shi Feng was so busy with his affairs in God's domain, he didn't have time to pay attention to Heaven's Rumble's development. If he wanted his training center to grow, he'd need another Grandmaster martial artist to defend it long-term. Among those working in Heaven's Rumble, Lei Bao was undoubtedly the closest to reaching the Grandmaster realm. After him there were Fire Dance and the others. Lei Bao's physical fitness and control had already peaked, and he was only a step away from breaking into the Grandmaster realm. To make that final step, his mental capacity needed to undergo a qualitative transformation. Although training in the Extraordinary Tower wasn't nearly as effective as training in the Tower of 4 Gods, Lei Bao had a high chance of making that final step with the help of the life potions. Once he became a Grandmaster, Heaven's Rumble would grow at a frightening pace. The training center would also have a much better chance of resisting the various major corporations' harassment. After finishing with Lei Bao, Shi Feng split another 10 life potions among Fire Dance, Violet Cloud, Cola, Shadow Sword and Turtle Dove, the guild's experts that had already grasped internal force. The life potions should help them develop their physical fitness and mental capacity. Shi Feng then drank one of the life potions before returning to his virtual gaming cabin and logging back into God's domain. He intended to open the portal to the western continent as soon as possible. Only then could Zero Wing stabilize its foothold in God's domain and secure enough resources and strength to develop the Heaven's Rumble Training Center. By the time Shifeng re-entered God's domain, Kola and the others were for the most part rested and ready. The team resumed grinding in the Demonwolf mountain range's outer region for a while, collecting the last mana strands for their quest. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This quest is a tough one. If not for the fine gold guards, we wouldn't have had any hope of completing it. I wonder what kind of rewards we'll get once we turn it in. Blackie pondered, filled with anticipation as he watched Shifeng collect the final mana strand. It'd be awesome if we earned a fragmented legendary item. This was the first time they had completed an inferior legendary quest, and they had obtained this quest in a level 100+ neutral map. The quest rewards would definitely be extraordinary. Alright, tidy up. Once everyone's ready, we're leaving, Shifeng said, chuckling at Blackie's excitement. He did not particularly care about the reward items. He knew that not even an inferior legendary quest had a high chance of granting a fragmented legendary item. Rather, he looked forward to the favorability they'd earn with the famed smith Alba Grey. In no time, Shifeng and his team stood before Alba Grey once more. Chapter 2398, Disintegration Power Activate. By the time Shifeng's group returned to Alba Grey, the NPC's divine might had weakened considerably. Even with the protection of the gods, the hero was in danger of dying. Seeing this, Shifeng had to admit that the jealous witch was incredibly powerful. With a single curse, she could cause a hero's downfall. With this kind of power and the witch's erratic mood, it was no wonder why she was considered a natural disaster. When she was in a good mood, she could help a kingdom prosper, but when her mood was sour, she could cause a kingdom's demise. Kingdoms and empires both revered and feared the woman. Lord Alba Grey, we've collected 1,000 strands of the jealous witch's mana. How should we proceed to lift your curse? Shifeng asked the frozen hero. Simple. You just need to release the mana you've collected around me, Alba Grey telepathically communicated with a thread of excitement. However, while I am removing the seal, the jealous witch's frost elf will sense this. I must ask you to stop her until I am free. Just as Shifeng was about to ask for more information, the snow around them stirred. It then gathered into the form of a woman. The woman was nearly 2 meters tall and looked mostly human, but unlike humans, her body was made entirely of snow. Divine runes etched themselves in her frozen form, giving her a sacred aura. One couldn't help the urge to submit to her will as they stood in her presence. As if the ambient mana had discovered its master, it gathered around the woman. A higher magic elf. Everyone gasped when they saw the snow woman's statistics. Ice Elf, Yulunium, High Magic Elf Mythic, Level 110 HP 3 500 000/3 500 000 Magic Elves had considerably high life ratings in God's domain, much higher than elemental creatures. Many of the spells humans wielded in this day and age had originated from magic elves. Mana favored these beings even more than ordinary elves because they possessed bodies made of mana itself. Meanwhile, high magic elves stood above magic elves in God's domain's hierarchy, akin to kings among magic elves. Their life ratings could even rival that of dragons. Do you really think you can escape my master's curse? Yulunium mocked as she gave Alba Grey a disdainful look. She then swept her glance over Shifeng and his companions, saying, Adventurers, it'd be best if you do not poke your noses into matters that do not concern you. Leave now and I will spare you. Stay and help Alba Grey, and I'll ensure you remain here, alongside the rest of these foolish knights. As Yulunium spoke, the team felt an overwhelming sense of dread. They struggled to move as if the air around them froze them in place. Even breathing became a laborious task. Is she really a mythic monster? Kola muttered, shocked as he stared at Yulunium. With just a few words, High Magic Elf had immobilized Tier 3 players. She was nothing like the mythic monsters they had faced before. Guild leader, she is far too dangerous for us. If we try to fight her, only the personal guards will last more than 10 seconds. Yan Tianxing expended an immense amount of energy to whisper to Shifeng. I doubt we'll even last 5 seconds against her, Shifeng said, smiling bitterly at Yulunium. He had never expected this inferior legendary quest to be so vicious. Collecting 1,000 mana strands within 10 days in the Demonwolf mountain range had already been a nigh impossible task, but the challenge before them was simply a joke. They might have had a chance if the system had pitted them against an ordinary magic elf, but trying to fight a high magic elf was on par with challenging a bona fide dragon. Although they had raided a Tier 4 ice dragon, Heathwaite had been severely injured before they had arrived. Its combat power had been nowhere near its peak. Furthermore, Shifeng had been able to suppress it with his heavenly dragon's breath, which was the only reason they had had a slim chance of defeating it. Yulunium, on the other hand, was a completely different story. Not only was Yulunium's combat power at its peak, but as a high magic elf, she had hundreds of spells under her command. She could wipe a 100-man Tier 3 team off the face of God's domain in a matter of seconds. If players tried to fight her without specific tools to counter her attacks, their only hope of survival was to flee as far and fast as possible. Unfortunately, summoning a Tier 4 Great Demon with the Bible of Darkness was impossible as well. Yulunium had high enough intellect that she'd target Shifeng immediately, and the Great Demon wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Adventurers, give me 90 seconds. If you can hold out for that long, I can free myself from this curse. Alba Grey suddenly shouted. Alba Grey's words left everyone speechless. They could barely move within Yulunium's domain. They'd be lucky to stall her for 10 seconds, not to mention 90. Yulunium was no normal mythic monster. She was a creature that was more skilled with her spells than Tier 4 great wizards, and she loved large-scale combat. She could annihilate them all with one AoE spell, leaving no opportunities to challenge her. 90 seconds? After some pondering, Shifeng turned to Kola and asked, Kola, can you hold her for 10 seconds? If I activate my berserk and life-saving skills, it should be doable, Kola said after considering his prowess. He currently wore the Frostwolf set, and with his fragmented legendary shield he was more than capable of tanking a level 100+ mythic monster. Yulunium's life rating rivaled that of dragons, but he shouldn't have any issues tanking her for 10 seconds if he activated his berserk and life-saving skills. Do you have a plan, guild leader? Xianxia asked. They could simply surrender, but they'd have to bear the brunt of the quest's penalty. I do, but I'm not sure if it will succeed, Shifeng replied. Unfortunately, we have no other options. Kola, get ready. If Alba Grey had asked them to stall Yulunium for several minutes, Shifeng would have had no choice but to surrender, but he had a chance if he only had to hold her off for 90 seconds. Shifeng then retrieved the Bible of Darkness and summoned a great demon. Seeing this confused his companions. They knew that Yulunium was intelligent enough to ignore the great demon and attack its summoner. How could a great demon possibly slow the high magic elf down? Although they weren't sure what Shifeng intended, they followed his instructions and split up, putting as much distance between them and Shifeng as possible. Meanwhile, Kola activated his berserk skill and waited for Shifeng's signal. Go! Shifeng yelled once everyone was in position. He immediately released the mana they had collected around Alba Grey as Kola dashed toward the enraged ice elf, activating Justice Roar to attract her attention. Foolish humans! You will die here with the rest of these fools. Yulunium bellowed. Watching Kola, she lightly waved hand. Ice lances, over a dozen meters long, coalesced in the air and flew toward the MT. Without chanting an incantation or drawing any runes, Yulunium had cast the Tier 4 ice-type spell Frosttooth. As the ice lances flew toward him, Kola relied on his combat standards and reaction speed to dodge, but he failed to evade one of the lances. He was forced to block the attack with his shield. Boom! The ice lance exploded against his shield, and the impact forced Kola to sink into the snowy ground. The attack had dealt over -300,000 damage, taking more than 10% of Kola's total HP. How powerful is she? Everyone's eyes nearly fell from their sockets. Kola had activated his berserk skill and life-saving skills, so he should have substantial damage reduction, yet he had still lost over 10% of his HP from one of Yulunium's attacks. Had he tried to charge at the ice elf without these skills active, she would have one-shot him. Seeing that the first attack had failed to end her target, Yulunium raised her hand again and began to chant an incantation. Responding to her command, a powerful blizzard swept toward Kola, streams of wind striking like pythons and threatening to tear Kola apart. As these wind serpents attacked, Kola was forced to halt his advance and defend himself with his shield. His HP rapidly plummeted. At this rate, he didn't have enough HP to last 5 seconds, much less 10. Fortunately, every healer on the team focused on recovering Kola's HP, keeping him alive, albeit barely. As the seconds passed, Cola's HP climbed and fell like a roller coaster as he danced on the fringes of death. The team's healers couldn't mitigate Yulunium's damage fully, and each round of healing seemed less effective as Cola steadily lost HP. I can't hold on for much longer, guild leader. Cola knew he had bit off more than he could chew as he glanced at his HP bar. As Cola finished his last word, another blizzard assaulted him from behind. Unfortunately, the wind pythons attacking from the front had him preoccupied, and he could only watch as more approached from behind. It's over. Sensing the incoming attack, Cola knew his time was up. However, a figure suddenly appeared behind him. It was none other than Shifeng. 10 seconds have passed. Leave the rest to me. Shifeng shouted over the roaring wind as he charged at the incoming wind python behind Cola. Guild leader. The team was confused as they watched Shifeng try to meet the incoming blizzard in battle. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Cola was a guardian knight, yet the blizzard's pythons had devoured a significant portion of his HP. As a swordsman, Shifeng would only dig his own grave by trying to block the python's attack. Disintegration power activate. Just as the blizzard was about to reach him, Shifeng activated the disintegration armor's strongest skill, disintegration power. The intensity of Shifeng's aura immediately skyrocketed, and gray smoke drifted from his body, shattering space around him. As the blizzard's python reached him, Shifeng swung Killing Ray to counter its attack. Chapter 2399, Power of Tier 4. As he swung Killing Ray, the python of ice and wind stretched open its maw and threatened to devour Shifeng. When the sacred sword and the blizzard clashed, the result stupefied everyone watching. With a passing flash of light, the blade sliced apart the powerful icy attack, dispersing the blizzard. He blocked it. What did the guild leader do? Cola, who desperately fought to hold his ground against the powerful blizzard attacking him, and Tianxing and the rest who watched from a distance, wondered if they were hallucinating. Tianxing and the others could tell how powerful the wind pythons were based on Cola's struggle against Yulunium's attacks. If they tried to block one of the wind python's strikes, it'd be a miracle if they didn't die instantly, even with an active berserk skill. Cola had already activated his life-saving skill, which drastically reduced incoming damage. Without that, Yulunium's wind pythons would have long since ended his life. And yet, Shifeng had countered one of the wind pythons with a single strike. The outcome even surprised Shifeng. He hadn't expected his strike to be so powerful after using disintegration power to upgrade himself to a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. So this is the true strength of a Sword Emperor. Shifeng thought as he relished the strength he had wielded with his counterattack. Shifeng had never been able to break past Tier 3 into Tier 4 during his previous life, so he had never felt the power a Tier 4 player commanded. He only knew that they were incredibly strong. But after taking a moment to adapt to his Tier 4 epic mana body, he more or less understood why so few Tier 3 players could stand against those at Tier 4, even when wielding a fragmented legendary weapon. The differences between Tier 3 and Tier 4 players weren't limited to basic attributes and physique. There was also a qualitative difference in the way their bodies conducted mana. With his improved mana body, Shifeng's mind was clearer than ever before, and his body constantly felt at the ready. This was evident through his counterattack. He had used the bronze combat technique Lightning Flash, executing 17 attacks in a single strike. As he did, the 17 attacks had even devoured the space before them, which was a feat he definitely wasn't capable of without disintegration power active. With how clear his mind was, he knew that Tier 3 players had no hope against Tier 4 players, even if they managed to bridge the gap between their basic attributes and physiques. A Tier 4 mental state was on an entirely different level. During the brief moment Shifeng analyzed his Tier 4 state, Yulunium became enraged having seen this swordsman shatter her attack, and the ambient mana began to rampage around her. The ice elf began to chant another incantation while she drew divine runes in the air with flying speed, stupefying Elofe and the other magical class team members. Based on the number of runes Yulunium drew, she was clearly trying to cast a large-scale destruction spell, but normally, players needed a long time to complete such a spell. The high magic elf, on the other hand, drew several dozen lines of divine runes in 2 seconds. It was simply unbelievable. Before the watching team members could snap out of their dazes, a magic array covering a 200-yard radius appeared above the snowy battlefield. As it did, It sucked dry all ice-type mana in the area, concentrating it within the array's core. Insignificant humans, you will pay for your foolishness. Yulunium snarled after finishing her chant. She then raised a fine-boned finger and pointed it at Shurfeng. Tier 4 large-scale destruction spell Frost Shower. Several hundred icy meteors pulled themselves free from the magic array and descended on the frozen lake, each one containing enough power to shatter space itself. We're doomed. Watching the incoming meteors, the team began to despair. This attack could even wipe out a team of several hundred Tier 3 players in an instant. She's finally getting serious? Shurfeng, on the other hand, wasn't surprised to see the incoming balls of ice. Calmly, he activated the 7 Luminaries' Ring's absolute domain. High magic elves could even rival God's domain's dragons. And how powerful exactly was a dragon? A dragon was the personification of a natural disaster. Not even a full kingdom could stop a dragon's wrath, and it would be forced to watch as the creature devastated its territories. High magic elves might have a slightly lower life rating than dragons, but they had the combat power to rival the monstrosities due to their exceptional talent with wielding magic. High magic elves could effortlessly cast frighteningly powerful spells, which usually required a long casting time. An ordinary Tier 4 Great Wizard, for example, would need a dozen seconds to cast a Tier 4 large-scale destruction spell, but Yulunium only needed 2 seconds. As the hail of meteors bombarded the frozen lake, they transformed a 200-yard radius area into an icy hell. Fortunately, not even Tier 4 spells could break through Shurfeng's absolute domain, and Shurfeng and his companions within range of his skill emerged unharmed. The moment Yulunium's attack ended, Shurfeng charged at the Ice Elf. Yulunium was a magical class being. If she were allowed to cast her spells freely, she could even slay Tier 5 players, much less Shurfeng's Tier 3 teammates. If Shurfeng wanted to prevent her from slaughtering them all, he had to face her in melee combat. With absolute domain's protection, Shurfeng could approach Yulunium while she bombarded him with a steady stream of Tier 4 spells, but as he approached, he had to admit that this ice elf was incredibly powerful. Not only were her basic attributes considerably higher than his, but she also had an endless supply of Tier 4 spells at her command. Even after forcibly promoting himself to Tier 4, Shurfeng was at a major disadvantage. With absolute domain's duration running out, Zero Wings members, who watched from a distance, began to grow nervous. Yulunium would have torn Shurfeng to shreds by now if not for absolute domain's protection. Her attacks against their guild leader weren't like the Ice Elf's assault against Kola. She had even begun to double speed cast. Combined with her already absurd casting speed, not even Shurfeng could dodge all of her attacks in time. He was forced to rely on Sword's orbit to block some of the attacks, lest the impact knock him back. As though she had anticipated the moment, Yulunium sneered and summoned a crystalline staff. The instant absolute domain came to an end. With a swing of her staff, she revealed numerous magic arrays that had been hidden under the snow around her. Countless icicles shot from the arrays, flying toward Shurfeng, and a powerful blizzard of hail and snow descended on the swordsman. Are you kidding me? Is Yulunium really just a monster? Blackie's eyes nearly fell from their sockets when he saw the magic arrays appear around Shurfeng. Not only had the Ice Elf set traps during the battle, but her traps had been so cleverly placed that not even Blackie, a cursemancer, had noticed them. This was the first time he had ever experienced such a thing in God's domain. Moreover, Yulunium had concealed over a dozen magic arrays under the snow. As they activated simultaneously, they had the power of more than a dozen Tier 4 magical classes attacking as one. An attack like this would even turn a Tier 4 metric tons into Swiss cheese. As expected of a high magic elf, she's even calculated my skill's duration. The incoming icicles didn't surprise Shurfeng in the least. He immediately commanded his summoned great demon, which had been on standby, to join the fray. Mythic monsters' intellect shouldn't be underestimated after level 100, especially that of a high magic elf like Yulunium. Shurfeng had expected her to employ traps. If these creatures were any weaker, the various superpowers of his previous life wouldn't have struggled so hard against superior mythics. The great demon appeared behind Shurfeng instantly and blocked the icicles coming in from behind its master. With the great demon's help, Shurfeng could concentrate on the wind pythons attacking him head-on. However, despite focusing on defense, the wind pythons were too powerful for him, and his HP continued to fall with each attack he blocked. If he hadn't had the help of his healer's diligent spellcasting, he wouldn't have lasted more than 15 seconds against this bombardment. With the Great Demon guarding his back and the rear-line healer's support, Shifeng had a much easier time distracting Yulunium. Before even Shifeng had realized it, another 50 or so seconds had passed, and only 5 seconds remained before Disintegration power's duration would end. All of your efforts are futile, human. Your power is already fading, and once it does, both you and Alba Grey will forever decorate this lake as ice sculptures. Yulunium declared, flashing Shifeng a sinister grin when she sensed Disintegration power begin to fade. Is that so? Shifeng shot back, unfazed despite Disintegration power's duration running out. On the contrary, he revealed a bright smile as he said, I disagree. With that comment, Yulunium realized that something was amiss. She immediately shifted her gaze toward the distant Anna, but it was too late as the personal guard completed the final verse of her incantation. A holy light pierced the clouds and shot toward the frozen lake as a higher Valkyrie with 3 sets of pure white wings appeared not far from the ice elf. A higher Valkyrie. Yulunium's expression shifted when she saw her newest opponent. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Valkyrie gave Yulunium no time to prepare as she threw her thunder spear at the high magic elf, its astonishing power exploding through the space around it. A higher Valkyrie's life rating couldn't compare to that of a dragon, but it was on par with a high magic elfess. Yulunium was forced to focus on the higher Valkyrie's attack, defending herself. The higher Valkyrie demanded all of Yulunium's attention, and the ice elf had no energy to spare on Shifeng. She couldn't even defend herself from his great demon's attacks, which steadily chipped away at her HP. As the seconds passed, the curse on Alba Grey grew weaker, yet Yulunium couldn't do anything about it. 90 seconds after Shifeng had released the Jealous Witch's mana around the NPC, everyone heard ice shatter as Alba Grey broke free of his icy prison. Chapter 2400 Sword Saint. Seeing Alba Grey break free from his curse, Shifeng breathed a deep sigh of relief. Although the higher Valkyrie could keep Yulunium busy, it couldn't exist for long. If the higher Valkyrie had disappeared before Alba Grey had freed himself, Shifeng wouldn't have been able to stop the ice elf even with twofold berserk. Not only was there a full tier difference between them, but Yulunium was also powerful enough to rival a dragon. Shifeng wouldn't have been able to resist her attacks for long. Damn it! Yulunium grew incensed when she noticed Alba Grey was free. She swung her icy staff at Shifeng, bellowing, I'll send you all to hell. The high magic elf began to chant an incantation, and a threefold magic array covering a 500-yard radius began to form in the sky. The instant the array took shape, it tore apart space around it. 2 seconds later, these spatial tiers transformed into a gigantic black hole. So this is her true strength. Shifeng looked up at the black hole with a grim expression. Tier 5 spell Void Storm. Tier 5 spells were beyond extraordinary. They had enough power to destroy an entire city, transforming it into a lifeless land. This was why the various kingdoms and empires feared Tier 5 beings. Even emperors had to show respect before them. Shifeng had never dreamed that Yulunium could cast Tier 5 spells, despite being a Tier 4 creature. There was only a difference of 1 tier between Tier 4 and 5, but the difference between a Tier 4 spell and a Tier 5 spell was like the difference between heaven and earth. Any random Tier 5 offensive spell could severely injure a Tier 4 creature. If a Tier 4 player tried to stand against a Tier 5 spell, their death would almost be a guarantee. Even Tier 4 MTs could withstand such power. Players wouldn't even have a chance to flee since the amount of mana a Tier 5 spell commanded would freeze space around them. When Zero Wings members saw the Void Storm forming above them, they turned a deathly pale. The resulting shockwave would easily cover several thousand yards. They had no hope of escaping this spell's range. Before any of them could start running for their lives, however, a pitch-black storm emerged from the black hole, covering the world in an endless darkness. Not even Shifeng knew how to get out of this one. Absolute Domain might be able to protect them, but the skill was still on cooldown. They couldn't escape via instantaneous transfer scrolls either, since space around them had frozen. Fortunately, they had completed their quest. Even if they died, they'd only lose some EXP which they could quickly recover. Seeing the descending storm of darkness, Shifeng prepared to die. Suddenly, Alba Gray unsheathed the golden sword hanging from his waist and slashed it toward the endless darkness. A brilliant light spread through the darkness, purifying it. In just 3 seconds, Alba Gray's holy light had vanquished Yulunium's void storm. Crap. Isn't that hero a little too powerful? Yan Tianxing and the others gaped in shock, unable to process what had just happened. In one move, Yulunium had transformed the day into night, whereas Alba Gray had returned daylight to the frozen lake with a move of his own. Their combat power was simply unbelievable. Staring at Alba Gray, Zero Wings members finally understood what it meant to be a hero. A hero could not be overwhelmed by numbers. All of the monsters they had fought were insignificant before Alba Gray. The NPC could likely even slaughter a full group of Tier 4 players instantly. Damn it! You've actually become a sword saint. Yulunium stared at Alba Gray in astonishment as her void storm dissipated. That's right. Removing the curse has allowed me to grasp some of the principles I needed to make a breakthrough. You are no longer a match for me. Alba Gray roared, a hint of excitement lacing his tone. Although the jealous witch's curse had caused him endless suffering, studying it had allowed him to understand the concepts he needed to become a true Tier 5 sword saint. A Tier 5 sword saint. Shifeng was similarly shocked and he spun to look at Alba Gray. Alba Gray, Sacred Magic Knight. Hero Sword Saint. Level? HP? NPCs faced greater struggles when trying to complete their promotions, but this was also why NPCs' status rose dramatically with every promotion in God's domain. A Tier 3 NPC, for example, could serve as a minor city's magistrate, while a Tier 4 NPC could serve as a magistrate in a major city. Even emperors had to show respect before Tier 5 NPCs. But as far as Shifeng could remember, Alba Gray had only been a Tier 4 hero during his previous life. This hadn't changed even after 10 years since God's Domain's launch. Alba Gray had never managed to become a Tier 5 sword saint. Even so, as a hero, Alba Gray had been able to contend with ordinary Tier 5 NPCs. Including his identity as a famed smith, even the various empires had taken him seriously. And yet, Alba Gray was now a Tier 5 sword saint. It is true. Now that you are a sword saint, I am no match for you, but don't you dare think this is over. Yulunium declared as she glared at Alba Gray. She then turned to Shifeng and continued, "You as well, adventurer." After her bold declaration, the ice elf began to disintegrate into snowflakes. "Don't think you can get away from me that easily," Alba Gray shouted. He unsheathed the second sword hanging from his waist and charged at Yulunium, swinging the pitch-black blade. He had only executed a normal slash, but from a distance, the attack had looked like a black wall, rising into the air and extending more than 500 meters. The pitch-black wall bisected the high magic elf, and Yulunium released a harrowing scream as a snow-white energy crystal fell from her body. Although the attack had significantly weakened Yulunium's life aura, she successfully read latest chapters at Wuxia World. As the black wall faded from existence, only Alba Gray remained on the snow-covered lake. It seemed she still managed to escape. Alba Gray frowned as he glared at the spatial tear before him. Shifeng, who stood nearby, wasn't surprised in the least that the ice elf had gotten away. A mythic-ranked high magic elf was on par with a mythic-ranked world boss of the same level. In fact, she should be even stronger. She could cast Tier 5 spells after all, which proved that she was only half a step away from becoming a Tier 5 being herself. Even a Tier 5 hero would face a long battle to kill her. With Yulunium's disappearance, Shifeng heard the sound of a system notification. "System, congratulations. You have completed the inferior legendary quest, last night. Quest completion rate, 93%. Quest rating, S-rank. Chapter 2401 Alba Gray's reward and S-rank rating?" Shifeng was astonished when he saw the outcome of his quest. He'd thought that he had barely passed with a C-rank rating. His team had spent 9 days collecting the 1,000 mana strands. He had never dreamed that he would earn an S-rank rating after taking so long. Receiving an S-rank rating for high-ranked quests with completion rate indicators was incredibly difficult in God's domain. The quests themselves were typically challenging, and players had to complete the quest to near perfection to achieve such a high result. However, if players could earn an S-rank rating, the original rewards would be improved slightly. Although the bonus wouldn't be very high, the additional rewards for an epic ranked or higher quest would be extremely valuable. A player had a 20% chance of earning an epic item as their reward for completing an epic quest, but if they gained the bonus from an S-rank rating, their chances of earning an epic item would increase to 30% or even 40%. When completing an inferior legendary quest, an S-rank rating could lead to a fragmented legendary item as a reward, which was normally impossible. Although Zero Wing had plenty of fragmented legendary items, every fragmented legendary item could enable a player to become a peak or apex expert in the future. Thus, every fragmented legendary item was a welcome addition. After the system had notified Shifeng of his results, Alba Gray approached him. "Fellow adventurers, thank you for saving me from that curse. I owe you all a big favor. Although my night division is no more, I will do my best to assist you with one matter," Alba Gray gratefully offered, showing none of the arrogance Tier 5 powerhouses usually possessed. "System, you have obtained Alba Gray's trust. Alba Gray's favorability of you has increased by 80 points. You have obtained Alba Gray's communication crystal." Alba Gray's statement and the system notification excited every member of the team. They had already witnessed the hero's power and now they could reach out to Alba Gray and ask him for a favor. None of them had expected to receive this kind of reward. "Guild leader, with Alba Gray's help, we can destroy one of Starlink's cities. I can't wait to see their faces," Kola said, his eyes glowing as he gazed at Alba Gray. "That's right. Let's destroy Starlink's new city. I want to see how they intend to duke it out with us after that." Blackie exclaimed, nodding. Starlink had persistently caused trouble for Zero Wing, especially with its newest city. That city had claimed a ton of Zero Wing's potential profit. If they destroyed it, not only would Stone Forest City regain its unique status as the only city in a level 100 neutral map, but they could also deal a heavy blow to their enemy, killing two birds with one stone. "No, we no longer need to resort to such a tactic," Shifeng said, shaking his head. Starlink had constructed a city near a level 100 neutral map, but even if Alba Gray destroyed it, there was no guarantee that Starlink couldn't construct a new city. Moreover, other superpowers would soon have cities of their own in level 100 neutral maps. The various superpowers experts had already reached level 100 and begun to challenge their Tier 3 promotion quests. Constructing a new city near a level 100 neutral map wouldn't be difficult before long. Moreover, Alba Gray's favor was incomparably valuable, especially now that he had become a sword saint. Even emperors would struggle to earn a favor from this hero. Asking Alba Gray to attack a mere guild city was like killing a mosquito with a bazooka. Shifeng then walked up to the freed hero. "Lord Hero, I am a forger and have always been passionate about my craft. I am particularly interested in mana forging, and I have heard that your research on the subject is unparalleled on the continent. I'd like to study your notes if you'll allow it," Shifeng stated his request after taking a deep breath. A Tier 5 sword saint could even destroy a kingdom with ease, much less a city, but destroying a kingdom was nothing compared to the value of a famed smith's knowledge. Due to Alba Gray's status as a famed smith, even demigods treated him with respect. Of the many things this NPC was known for, the most famous was his mana forging notes. It was the capital Alba Gray had relied on to become a famed smith in the first place. In fact, his mana forging notes were one of the reasons that the Ten Saints Empire had become as powerful as it was now. The various superpowers had fought tooth and nail for a single leaf of Alba Gray's mana forging notes. Some had even offered to trade fragmented legendary items for the pages. With Alba Gray standing before him and offering him a favor, Shifeng had to secure the very item that made the NPC so famous. The hero took a long look at Shifeng, and the silence stretched until it felt awkward. "Is the request too much?" Shifeng anxiously asked. "You have a very good eye, young adventurer. You know what is most valuable," Alba Gray praised. "Unfortunately, I've stored my mana forging notes in the Ten Saints Empire's Imperial Library. Not even I have the authority to retrieve them, and unfortunately, the materials I would need to create a copy no longer exist in this world." Sure enough. Although Shifeng was disappointed, he wasn't surprised. The Ten Saints Empire treated Alba Gray's mana forging notes as a national treasure. The notes were even more valuable than a legendary item. Just as Shifeng was about to give up and wondered if he should ask the famed smith to craft him a custom-made fragmented legendary item, Gary opened his mouth to speak again. But don't be too disappointed. Before I penned the official mana forging notes, I created a few drafts. Although I have lost many of them, I do have one volume of my drafts with me. If you don't mind, I can gift you this volume. Alba Gray informed Shifeng as he retrieved an ancient booklet that radiated faint traces of mana. The booklet was old and tattered, but it felt somehow timeless, as if very few things in this world could destroy it. Thank you, Lord Hero. I will take good care of it, Shifeng said as he accepted the booklet. He was still disheartened that he couldn't obtain the full compilation of the mana forging notes. He was surprised and pleased that he could obtain one of the notes volumes. Alba Gray had relied on his mana forging notes to become a famed smith. A single volume could easily rival the value of a legendary item. There's no need to thank me. If you need help in the future, you may contact me through my communication crystal, Alba Gray said, smiling. He then transformed into a streak of light and disappeared from everyone's vision. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU System. You have earned Alba Gray's admiration. Alba Gray's favorability of you has increased by 10 points. System. Alba Gray's favorability of you has reached 100 points. You have become Alba Gray's friend. Blackie and the others were confused as they watched the exchange. They didn't understand why Shifeng had asked the hero for a tattered notebook, and based on their guild leader's expression, he seemed ecstatic about it. As Shifeng stored the mana forging notes draft volume in his bag, Xianxia approached with a white energy crystal in hand. Guild leader, this crystal Yulunium dropped is very strange. Even with my master appraisal skill, I couldn't appraise it, Xianxia said, a hint of excitement flashing in his eyes as he gazed at the energy crystal. Chapter 2402, Sacred Magic Temple. You couldn't appraise it? Xianxia's words piqued Shifeng's interest. Immediately, the swordsman used omniscient eyes on the crystal. In God's domain, very few things defied appraisal at the master rank. Only special items could not be appraised by a master appraiser. Generally, these special items were of extraordinary quality, and even the most inferior among them should be at the epic rank. 3 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds. Even after 15 seconds had passed, omniscient eyes still hadn't fully analyzed the crystal. What is this item? At this point, even Shifeng could not help but be surprised. When appraising items using omniscient eyes, 15 seconds were more than enough to analyze an epic item. Now, however, the loading bar was still a long way from full. Finally, when a total of 22 seconds had passed, the white energy crystal's information appeared before Shifeng. Magic Key, Epic Rank. A key that can open the second floor of the sacred magic temples found in Lost Ruins. Cooldown. 1 natural day. Upon seeing the appraisal results, Shifeng was dumbfounded. Guild leader, what is it? Xianxia asked curiously upon seeing Shifeng's surprised expression. A magic key. A secret key that can open the sacred magic temple's second floor. Shifeng said, a hint of excitement flashing across his eyes as he gazed at the white crystal in his hand. For a moment he even wondered if the reward for achieving an S-rank rating in the quest wasn't Alba Gray's favor, but this magic key instead. The sacred magic temple? Everyone was confused at Shifeng's words. They could be considered very knowledgeable regarding God's domain, but this was the first time they had heard the term, sacred magic temple. Judging by Shifeng's expression and manner of speaking, they concluded that it should be a very amazing place, yet they actually had never heard of it before. It's an excellent place to learn skills, spells and magic arrays. The learning efficiency in the sacred magic temple is at least double that in the outside world, Shifeng explained excitedly. The sacred magic temple was a relic of ancient times, which normally only appeared in ancient ruins or lost towns. The location of the magic gate Shifeng was aiming for this time was one of these ancient ruins. This ancient ruin housed not only a magic gate that led to the western continent but also a sacred magic temple. This sacred magic temple was another reason why the various superpowers had grown extremely envious of the dark power that ruled over the Demonwolf mountain range in his previous life. While inside the sacred magic temple, players could freely learn the information stored there so long they had access. The information contained within the sacred magic temple was generally related to skills, spells, and magic arrays used during ancient times. While this information was outdated, it was of great help to players. Since these skills, spells, and magic arrays were the original forms of present versions, studying them would allow players to improve their control over current skills, spells, and magic arrays significantly. Hence, the Sacred Magic Temple was a place many players sought to visit. Meanwhile, every Sacred Magic Temple had a total of 3 floors, with the quality and quantity of information stored within each subsequent floor superior to the previous one. However, seals restricted access to the upper floors. Decoding these seals was beyond even a Grandmaster magician. To enter these restricted floors, one needed to have the corresponding key to do so. Shifeng never thought that Ulunium would actually drop such a treasure. This was simply unbelievable. Guild leader, can we learn Tier 3 spells from the Sacred Magic Temple? Blackie asked eagerly when he heard Shifeng's words. Tier 3 skills and spells were exceedingly rare. Despite grinding in the Demonwolf mountain range for so many days, they had yet to come across even one Tier 3 skill book or spell book. The Tier 3 skills and spells they possessed thus far were obtained through legacy skill points. If they wished to learn more, they would have to find other ways to do so. If he could freely learn as many Tier 3 spells as possible, then his strength would definitely skyrocket. Learning Tier 3 spells? Dream on, Shifeng retorted, rolling his eyes at Blackie. If it were possible to learn Tier 3 skills and spells from the Sacred Magic Temple, there wouldn't have been so many Tier 3 players in the past that had failed to learn all of the standard Tier 3 skills and spells for their class. Having identified the magic key, Shifeng had everyone search for the remains of the magic gate. At this point, everyone was mostly of the same level as the monsters roaming the Demonwolf mountain range's outer area, so scouring it became a lot easier. After spending just half a day exploring, they located a hidden cave below the frozen lake. After bypassing a magic trap, the team arrived before a ruin that had been abandoned ages ago. Sure enough, this place matches the information. When Shifeng saw the tightly shut silver gate and the 3-story Sacred Magic Temple, he inwardly breathed out a sigh of relief. Due to his reincarnation, the development of the current god's domain had greatly deviated from his previous life's version. Hence, he hadn't been confident that the Demonwolf mountain range's magic gate still existed in this life. Guild leader, quick look. It's the magic gate. Blackie exclaimed in excitement, pointing at the silver gate. With this, our guild will also be able to travel between the 2 main continents. Blackie had never imagined that they would actually find a magic gate leading to the western continent. Moreover, even if he wasn't an expert in magic arrays, he could tell by the looks of the gate's shape and the magic arrays engraved on it that the gate was not a one-time use tool but one that allowed players to freely travel between the 2 main continents. Now that Zero Wing had access to the resources of both continents, there was no doubt that the guild would develop into a superpower. It seems the gate has been preserved quite well. The restrictions aren't that significant, Shifeng said calmly as he inspected the silver gate. In its current state, the magic gate before him could be used only once a week, and each use allowed up to 10 players to be teleported, with each person costing 2,000 magic crystals. Shifeng was relatively satisfied with this outcome. It was much better than some of the other magic gates he knew of that teleported only 3 to 5 people at a time. The only troublesome aspect about the gate before him was its long cooldown. However, now that he had activated the gate, he just needed to wait a few more days to travel to the western continent and start raking in a ton of resources and credits. After inspecting the magic gate, he shifted his sights to the Sacred Magic Temple. During his previous life, despite having access only to the Sacred Magic Temple's first floor, he had reaped a significant harvest, especially regarding his mana control and skill completion rate. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. As for the Sacred Magic Temple's second floor, all he had was hearsay. He had never personally visited it before. As for the third floor, he had never even heard of anyone reaching it, much less information about it. While everyone else was perusing the information available on the Sacred Magic Temple's first floor, Shifeng went to access the second floor. He took out the magic key and started chanting the incantation. The activation chant was very short and he completed it in 4 seconds. Suddenly he felt the mana around him roil. Immediately afterward he received a system notification. System, do you wish to enter the Sacred Magic Temple's second floor? Chapter 2403, Reaching the Realm of Masters. Looking at the system notification, Shifeng immediately chose to enter the Sacred Magic Temple's second floor. Immediately, A threefold magic array appeared beneath Shifeng's feet, and his body instantly turned into a streak of light that shot through the corridor heavily studded with magic arrays. When Shifeng opened his eyes again, he was standing inside a majestic hall. The hall looked grand and dazzling, with 12 statues of gods supporting its ceiling. As if they were alive, these statues radiated a boundless life aura as well as a faint trace of divine might that felt as if a boulder was weighing down on Shifeng. What a powerful divine might! If a Tier 2 player were to come here, they wouldn't even be able to move. Shifeng was astonished as he looked at the statues inside the hall. Just walking was already extremely taxing for him. A Tier 2 player would most likely collapse as soon as they arrived in the hall. Subjected to the divine might here, he could feel his concentration getting depleted. Players wouldn't be able to remain in this place for long periods. Just as Shifeng was wondering why there was such a setup in the Sacred Magic Temple's second floor, the walls around him started parting, revealing a total of 3 corridors. Every one of these corridors led toward a separate hall filled with various scrolls. At the center of each of these separate halls was a tome made entirely out of gold. Magic array designs. Shifeng's breathing accelerated when he saw the golden tomes. These magic array designs weren't just any ordinary designs but advanced magic array designs, something rarely found even in the various kingdoms and empires of God's domain. It should be known that even the Divine Beast's Descent Magic Array, one of Zero Wing's current trump cards, was only an intermediate magic array. An advanced magic array would be a treasure that could protect the guild from imminent peril. Meanwhile, based on the mana the golden tomes radiated, Shifeng was certain that they were advanced magic array designs. However, due to his distance from the tomes, he couldn't tell what kind of advanced magic array the designs were. For the moment Shifeng started toward one of the 3 corridors, 9 magic arrays suddenly appeared in each of them. After seeing these magic arrays, Shifeng more or less understood how the Sacred Magic Temple's second floor operated. Of the 9 magic arrays that had appeared in each corridor, each one was stronger than the one before. Moreover, the magic arrays in each corridor differed in strength. The first magic array set up in the easiest corridor was an intermediate magic array, while the more difficult corridor had an advanced magic array, and the most difficult corridor had a master magic array. Players were most likely required to decode these magic arrays in order to reach the hall at the end of each corridor. However, since just being in the hall sapped a player's concentration, Shifeng estimated that he could remain here for only 6 or 7 hours, and this was because he possessed an advanced bloodline. An ordinary Tier 3 player would last 4 or 5 hours at best. In other words, Shifeng had to decode the magic arrays within 7 hours. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to reach the hall at the end of the corridor. As for destroying the magic arrays, that was utterly impossible. Due to the pressure from the 12 statues, even a Tier 4 player couldn't exert sufficient strength to destroy the magic arrays protecting the corridors, much less a Tier 3 player like Shifeng. Only Tier 5 players would be capable of such a feat. However, it would still be a long time before Tier 5 players started appearing in the game. Shifeng couldn't rely on external tools either. The moment he entered the hall, only his epic spatial bag remained usable. The system had locked everything else. My time is limited, so I have no choice but to take the simplest path. After giving the matter some thought, Shifeng decided to go for the corridor protected by the intermediate magic array. However, despite the easiest corridor starting with only an intermediate magic array, the first magic array itself was by no means simple. It definitely ranked above average among intermediate magic arrays. Even an ordinary intermediate magician would need a lot of time to decode it. However, for Shifeng, who was only half a step from becoming a master magician, decoding it was a simple task. In the end, he spent only 2 minutes on the second magic array, was at least 20% more complex than the first. Shifeng spent 3 minutes on it. The third magic array was similarly an intermediate magic array, but it ranked at the top among intermediate magic arrays. Shifeng required nearly 5 minutes to decode it. Upon reaching the fourth magic array, he could not help but frown. The fourth is already an advanced magic array? Shifeng was startled as he studied the advanced magic array. Although the advanced magic array before him was a very simple one, even the simplest of advanced magic arrays was a lot more complex than the strongest intermediate magic array. Meanwhile, if the fourth magic array in his path was already an advanced magic array, he did not dare imagine what kind of magic array awaited him further on. However, despite his thoughts, Shifeng did not stop decoding the magic array and succeeded 12 minutes later. Fortunately, the fifth magic array was not as difficult as he imagined it would be. It was still an ordinary advanced magic array, only slightly more complex. He spent 15 minutes decoding this magic array. The sixth magic array reached the standard of mid-level advanced magic arrays, requiring nearly 20 minutes to decode it. The seventh magic array was an upper-level advanced magic array. At this standard, a newly minted advanced magician would need 1 or 2 hours to decode it. Shifeng, though, spent only 30 minutes. The difficulty increased to the peak-level standard by the eighth magic array. Shifeng found this advanced magic array a little tricky. However, after struggling for an hour, he still managed to decode it. A master magic array. When Shifeng arrived before the ninth magic array and sensed the concentration of mana within it, he felt the urge to curse out loud. There was a qualitative difference between master magic arrays and advanced magic arrays. Not only was a master magic array far more complex, but decoding it also required multitasking. Specifically, one would have to control multiple streams of mana simultaneously. Players needed to have extraordinary control over mana to accomplish this feat. However, as only one magic array remained between him and the hall, Shifeng still decided to give decoding the master magic array a try. The master magic array before him was very basic. Hence, it was not entirely impossible for a half-step master magician like Shifeng to challenge it. He merely needed to control 3 separate flows of mana simultaneously. The difficult part was that he had to control each mana flow at a different speed in order to decode the magic array's 3 sections simultaneously. If he failed to do so, then the decoding process would miscarry. After taking a deep breath, Shifeng started carefully controlling the mana flow of the 3 sections, making sure that the output was neither too strong nor too weak. This level of mana control was definitely beyond Tier 2 players. On his first attempt, the decoding process failed because the output for 2 sections was too high. His second attempt went awry as he had lowered the output for the 2 aforementioned sections by too much. The difficulty of adjusting the output to a suitable level was many times greater than trying to thread a needle. However, after repeated attempts, Shifeng started to grasp the appropriate way of manipulating the master magic array's mana. The method was similar to how he controlled the mana inside his mana body. In fact, as he tried to decode the master magic array, he also learned to exert greater control over the mana flow inside his mana body, thereby increasing the efficiency of his mana usage, following which, time passed by rapidly. Shifeng's spirit weakened. Contrary to expectations, however, his focus did not falter in the slightest but grew increasingly more acute. His brain activity also continuously increased. He even forgot how to control his own body, his mind treating the mana inside the master magic array as his own limbs instead. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. In the next moment, 3 streams of mana flowed across the master magic array at 3 different speeds. The stream that had moved too quickly on Shifeng's last attempt was a touch slower now, while the stream that had moved too slowly had accelerated slightly. When the 3 streams of mana had filled up the final pattern in their respective sections of the magic array, all 3 actually arrived at the magic array's center at exactly the same time. I did it! Shifeng could not help shouting in excitement. The moment all 3 streams of mana came into contact with each other, the magic array before him released a dazzling light. A moment later, the sound of a system notification entered Shifeng's ears. System, congratulations. You have become a master magician. Chapter 2404, Frightening Treasury System. You have become a master magician. Rewarding the Great Magician title. The system notification repeated 3 times. However, Shifeng paid no attention to it whatsoever. Instead, he shut his eyes and focused on the mana flow of his mana body. He then unsheathed Killing Ray and executed a slash. Secret technique Lightning Flash. With just a swing of the sword, 17 sword lights crisscrossed and cut through the empty space before Shifeng, the attack creating a sonic boom that echoed down the corridor. No wonder the magician class is labeled the number 1 subclass. So this is why. Shifeng was a little surprised by the effects of his technique. Magic arrays were the foundation for controlling mana. Many items could not exist without magic arrays. Hence, many players in God's domain would pick up the magician class as a subclass. This was especially true for forgers and alchemists, who would not be able to tread far on their path without the magician class. However, Shifeng had never thought that becoming a master magician would raise his control over his mana body to a whole new realm. Now, not only could he simultaneously control multiple streams of mana much more quickly, but his body also became much more agile. The power of his combat techniques also improved considerably. Although his proficiency at multitasking with mana still was not particularly high, which prevented him from fully leveraging these new advantages, he just needed time. Once he familiarized himself with this process, his utilization of it in combat would improve. Moreover, the Great Magician title increased his maximum concentration by 10% and improved his mana control by 10%, which made controlling his mana body easier. At this moment, Shifeng more or less understood why players who had become master magicians in the past were usually very powerful. Just the minor improvement toward the mana body would allow players to exhibit much greater power with their combat techniques, skills and spells. Not to mention, a master magician could construct basic magic arrays without the assistance of materials and use these magic arrays as a tool for support or interference. The benefits of becoming a master magician were massive. Now, if he could get Aqua Rose, Violet Cloud and the other magical class experts of Zero Wing to become master magicians within a short period, the guild's overall strength would definitely increase substantially. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng shifted his gaze to the center of the nearby hall. Now that he had decoded the last magic array, the advanced magic array design was already within his reach. So long as he could obtain it, helping Zero Wing's members get promoted to the advanced magician rank and subsequently the master magician rank would be much easier. When Shifeng stepped into the hall, the contents of the hall entered his view. The hall was not particularly large, only the size of about 3 basketball courts. However, many magic array scrolls were displayed all over the hall. These magic array scrolls, ranging from intermediate magic arrays to advanced magic arrays, all came in complete sets. Every one of these magic arrays was of the barrier type. Shifeng was dumbfounded upon seeing this scene. Barrier-type magic arrays were things that the current powers of God's domain urgently needed, especially intermediate barrier-type magic arrays. Past level 100, monsters at the Grand Lord rank or above would be immune to the effects of basic barrier-type magic arrays. One needed intermediate barrier-type magic arrays or better to suppress them. However, intermediate barrier-type magic arrays were incredibly rare. Even Zero Wing had only a few complete sets. Inside this hall, however, there were over 100 sets of intermediate barrier-type magic arrays and as many as 12 sets of advanced barrier-type magic arrays. This was practically a treasury of magic arrays. No wonder nobody was willing to reveal any concrete information about the Sacred Magic Temple's second floor. When Shifeng looked at the treasure trove before him, he understood why there had been so little information regarding the Sacred Magic Temple's second floor in his previous life. One could make a fortune just selling the magic array scrolls here, since the various major powers were willing to pay over 1,000 gold to purchase a set of intermediate barrier-type magic arrays. After all, not all guilds possessed as many fine gold guards as Zero Wing did. Meanwhile, without the help of powerful personal guards, raiding a level 100+ Grand Lord was an extremely difficult and costly task. However, with the suppression effects of an intermediate barrier, the raid difficulty would instantly decrease by a large margin. The expert teams of guilds would then have the ability to raid level 100+ Grand Lords. With the scrolls for an intermediate barrier at hand, teams could also start exploring level 100 neutral maps much more boldly, as they no longer had to fear level 100+ Grand Lords. While Shifeng was thinking of sweeping these magic array scrolls into his bag, his gaze still drifted to the golden tome hovering in the middle of the hall. Previously, as he had been too far from the tome, he could only tell that the magic array design was of the advanced standard. Now that he was standing so close to it, he discovered that it wasn't just an ordinary advanced magic array design. Not only was the golden tome enveloped by a dense layer of mana, but it also radiated a faint trace of divine. Although the power of this divine might was negligible and would have no effect on a player's performance, it still signified that the tome was once the possession of a god. Otherwise, it wouldn't have absorbed a god's aura. Following which, Shifeng walked up to the tome to inspect it. This is an ancient magic array design. Shifeng's breathing accelerated when he read the tome's statistics. 12 elemental pillars. Ancient magic advanced magic array, requires at least 12 tier 2 magical classes to cast. Places a seal on all enemies within a 200-yard radius. Effects will improve by 1 grade with every additional 12 casters added. The magic array can be cast by up to 36 casters. Required materials: 1 mana stone, 12 elemental crystals, 12 magic scrolls and 1 advanced magic scroll. Ancient magic had been lost after the Great Destruction. Although humans had researched new forms of magic after the Great Destruction, the performance of current spells and magic arrays was still greatly inferior to that of ancient spells and ancient magic arrays. This was because ancient magic was taught to humans by the gods. It was not only much more refined but also much closer to the essence of magic. Any player that successfully learned ancient magic would be much stronger than players of the same tier. Magic arrays that applied the principles of ancient magic were also much stronger than those that did not. Only very few ancient magic arrays had been passed down in God's domain. Hence, every ancient magic array was incredibly valuable and their designs all the more so. The value of an intermediate magic array design that applied ancient magic principles could rival that of fragmented legendary items. Needless to say, advanced versions would be even more valuable. Now that such a design had appeared before Shifeng, how could he not be surprised? For a moment, Shifeng even entertained the thought of attempting the other 2 corridors and securing the magic array designs housed in the halls beyond them. Fortunately, though, his rationality prevented him from doing so. The reason for this was very simple. If even the easiest corridor required a master magician to break through, then the other 2 corridors would definitely demand an even higher standard. At least, those 2 corridors were not challenges that a newly minted master magician like himself could break through for now. He would merely waste his time trying. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The materials needed for the 12 elemental pillars are relatively easy to procure. Even the mana stone, which is the most troublesome material to get, is no problem for me. So long as I can mass-produce this magic array, I can definitely raise the performance of the guild's teams by a large margin. At that time, even the superpowers expert teams won't be a match for Zero Wings when it comes to raiding field bosses. Shifeng grew excited as he looked at the design in his hands. In his opinion, even the combined value of 10 fragmented legendary items could not match the value of the 12 elemental pillars design. Guild leader, we're done setting up a teleportation point here. All we need to do is set up a teleportation device in the Ten Saints Empire, and we can teleport here anytime we want, Blackie reported excitedly after contacting Shifeng. All right. Have everyone get ready. It's time we headed home, Shifeng said, nodding, and started collecting all of the magic array scrolls inside the hall. In less than 10 minutes he had cleared out the entire hall. He then returned to White River City together with Blackie and the others. Chapter 2405. Changes to the Gravity Mountain Range. White River City, Zero Wings residence. When Shifeng and the others returned to the guild residence, an unusually depressing atmosphere greeted them. Now less than 100 players stood in line to take the recruitment test to join Zero Wing. The guild members in the residence only seemed to reanimate as Shifeng and his companions entered the guild hall. They were all excited for their guild leader's return. It's the guild leader. The guild leader is back. This is wonderful. Boss Blackie and the others have returned as well. The several hundred players in the hall ran up to Shifeng and his team to welcome them back. When Liang Jing, who was working in the lobby, saw the group, she ran over just as elated. Guild leader, you've finally decided to come back. Liang Jing breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't know what I was going to do if you hadn't returned soon. Why does the guild suddenly seem so disheartened? What happened while we were gone? Did we not earn enough coins from leasing Stone Forest City's private houses? Shifeng asked, curious. He had spoken with Liang Jing half a day ago about accepting coins as rent for Stone Forest City's private houses. Even in the worst-case scenario, the auction should have earned the guild around 20,000 gold, which would be more than enough to support Zero Wing for half a day. Zero Wing had other income sources after all. Even if the guild were restricted in the Dark Knight Empire, Zero Wing shouldn't have had a problem holding on for another 5 or 6 days. We still have enough coins, but we recently learned that someone discovered a special ruin in the Gravity Mountain Range and within it, a homed eagle egg. Moreover, the power discovered more than one egg. This has caused an uproar on Dragonheart Island. Now, the various superpowers are rushing to the ruin to search for more horned eagle eggs. We've partnered with Phoenix Rain to take part in the hunt, Liang Jing said. Anxiously, she continued. However, War Blood and Starlink have begun to cause more trouble. They're doing all they can to hinder our progress in the ruin. We thought it best to send Fire Dance and the other recently promoted Tier 3 players to lead the guild's level 100+ experts to the Gravity Mountain range as reinforcements. Unfortunately, Starlink started to target our players in the neutral maps around Star Moon Kingdom, and we don't have anyone left to stop it. Horned Eagle Eggs? Liang Jing's report left Shifeng a little confused. He had never considered that the Gravity Mountain range would be home to Horned Eagle Eggs. He certainly hadn't heard of such a thing in his previous life. Horned eagles were one of God's domain's flying mounts. They were only intermediate common rank, but they were still flying mounts, and as long as players obtained their eggs and hatched them, they could take the horned eagle hatchling to a tamer, where it would become a true flying mount. The very idea of flying mounts had driven the various superpowers to the brink of madness, but aside from Zero Wing, the number of superpowers on the eastern continent with flying mounts could be counted on one hand. Flying mounts were the future of God's domain. Whoever had the most would have a massive advantage. It was easy to imagine the various superpowers' reactions to the news that someone had found horned eagle eggs in the Gravity Mountain range. Meanwhile, to prevent Zero Wing from exploring the ruin, Starlink would do all it could to limit Zero Wing's movement to the Star Moon Kingdom. Based on what we've learned from the secret pavilion, Demon Palace has secretly sent over a dozen Tier 3 experts to the Gravity Mountain range to help Starlink in war blood against us. I'm afraid Fire Dance's group is in grave danger, Liang Jing said worriedly. By now, some of the various superpowers experts had completed their Tier 3 promotion quests, and although Zero Wing had the most right now, it couldn't take on multiple superpowers at once. In that case, let's split up into two groups, Shifeng said as he turned to Kola and the others. Kola, Turtledove, Shadow Sword, you three will follow me to the Gravity Mountain range. Tianxing, you'll lead the rest of the team to deal with those bastards hunting our players in the neutral maps nearby. It's too dangerous for just the four of you, guild leader. You should take more people with you. Starlink isn't the only power in the ruin. Many superpowers are heading there as we speak, Liang Jing hurriedly advised Shifeng. Shifeng was the guild symbol. They couldn't afford for something to happen to him, and at this point he no longer had the advantage of being the game's only Tier 3 player. Zero Wing couldn't afford to be as relaxed as it had been. Relax. No player should even dream of getting near the guild leader with the three of us around, Kola declared, grinning as he patted his chest. But Liang Jing gave Kola and the other two a worried look. Times had changed. Kola and his team had been busy on a quest, so they had no idea how much God's domain had changed while they've been gone. Rest assured, Big Sis Jing. We've grown a lot stronger, Shadow Sword said, nodding his agreement with Kola's statement. They had not just been wasting time in the Demonwolf mountain range. They might not be a match for a monster like Ulunium, but they were definitely strong enough to deal with new Tier 3 players. Alright, enough chatting. Everyone, let's get to work, Shifeng said. He could not help but shake his head and chuckle at Kola and Shadow Sword's confidence. He then turned back to Liang Jing saying, I need you to purchase elemental crystals and magic cores in bulk. I have an important use for them. If you don't have enough money, sell these intermediate magic array scrolls. I'm sure they'll fetch a high price. As he spoke, Shifeng retrieved the 100+ sets of intermediate magic array scrolls he had obtained from the Sacred Magic Temple and handed them to Liang Jing. Although the guild had quite a few elemental crystals and magic cores in stock, it didn't have nearly enough for him to exploit the 12 elemental pillars design. When she saw the scrolls, Liang Jing was stupefied. Do you really want me to sell all of these intermediate barrier scrolls, guild leader? Liang Jing had to ask. At this stage of the game, there were very few Tier 3 players in God's domain. Most of the players in level 100 neutral maps were still at Tier 2. However, exploring level 100 neutral maps was a major challenge for Tier 2 players, especially when it came to Grand Lord ranked bosses. Unfortunately, players needed to hunt these Grand Lords to obtain better equipment. Without strong enough equipment, players would have no hope of completing their Tier 3 promotion quests. Hence, the various powers had turned to magic arrays to suppress these bosses, increasing their chances of acquiring better weapons and equipment for their Tier 2 members. Because of this, intermediate barrier scrolls were incredibly popular right now, especially when sold in complete sets. A full set of intermediate barrier scrolls could easily fetch 800 gold or more. I've obtained an advanced barrier-type magic array design, so we don't need these anymore, But don't sell too many at once. Post them for sale one by one, Shifeng said. Intermediate barriers were valuable, but they couldn't compare to the 12 elemental pillars. Furthermore, this was the best time to sell intermediate barrier scrolls. As more players reached Tier 3, these scrolls would become less valuable. Since Shifeng didn't need to keep them for his guild, selling them for materials to craft advanced magic array scrolls would only benefit Zero Wing as a whole. I understand. I'll start posting them in the various kingdoms and empires' auction houses, Liang Jing said, her eyes glowing with excitement. She hadn't expected Shifeng to return with such an abundant harvest. An advanced barrier-type magic array design. With such a design, Zero Wing could produce as many advanced barrier scrolls as it wanted. With an advanced barrier, a team of Tier 2 players would even have a chance of defeating a level 100-plus Grand Lord-ranked archaic species. Liang Jing left to carry out Shifeng's orders. Shifeng, on the other hand, hurried toward the Gravity Mountain range with Cola, Turtledove, and Shadow Sword. The Molten Canyon, located within the Gravity Mountain range's core region, was crowded with players. Most of them were from the various superpowers and top adventurer teams, and every one of these players had reached level 100 or higher. Several players wearing the Heaven's Blade Adventurer Team emblem fought desperately to escape the Molten Canyon. However, several hundred level 100-plus experts, led by a Tier 3 player, stood between them and the canyon's exit. Leader, what should we do? They have a Tier 3 expert on their side. We've already used up all our instantaneous movement magic scrolls, a level 101 assassin from Heaven's Blade said, watching the Tier 3 Berserker King a short distance away with an anxious expression. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. I'll hold them off while the rest of you get out of here. If you don't make it out, Blood Oath will kill the commander. The level 102 female guardian knight leading the team growled through gritted teeth. We've sealed the area off already. Do you really believe you can escape? Even if you guys get past us, no one can save you. No one can stop War Blood in the Gravity Mountain range. The Tier 3 Berserker King shouted, sneering at Heaven's Blade's members. The Heaven's Blade's players despaired. The Berserker King had only spoken the truth. The War Blood Adventurer team had evolved. With the help of Starlink and Demon Palace, War Blood had become Dragonheart Island's #1 adventurer team. Even if they managed to break past War Blood's blockade and got far enough to ask for help, no one would help them. However, the moment the Berserker King finished his gloating, everyone in the area heard a deep voice. Is that so? And what if Zero Wing gets involved? Chapter 2406. Shock as the question echoed throughout the canyon's exit, everyone fell silent. None of them had ever thought someone would willingly stand against War Blood, and they all spun toward the origin of the voice. 4 figures, 3 men and a woman, entered the canyon. They had all hidden their information under black cloaks, and the group's leader, a man who looked to be around 30 years old, walked into the canyon as if he hadn't sensed the tense atmosphere surrounding the adventurer team groups. Zero Wing. For players, are these people tired of living? Zero Wing's members must be insane. Shouldn't they be mindful of the time and place if they want to challenge War Blood? War Blood might be helpless against Zero Wing in the northern region, but we're in the Gravity Mountain Range's southern region. More than half of War Blood's members are in the area. Players from various major powers were watching the situation at the canyon's exit, and they were surprised and confused as they watched 4 Zero Wing members interfere in the fight between War Blood and Heaven's Blade. War Blood's members might have been afraid of the declaration if this were taking place in the Gravity Mountain Range's northern region. However, in the Molten Canyon, even the various superpowers had to consider their options carefully before provoking War Blood. War Blood was the official #1 adventurer team on Dragonheart Island, after all. Even if Zero Wing's members were hellbent to poke their nose into the matter between War Blood and Heaven's Blade, they should at least compare the two sides' numbers. A total of 600 War Blood members blocked the canyon's exit, and every one of them was level 100 or higher. In contrast, Zero Wing had only sent 4 players to interfere. Zero Wing's audacity even rendered Heaven's Blade's members speechless, not to mention the spectators from the various major powers. Everyone thought Zero Wing was playing with fire. Although they were grateful that Zero Wing's members had stepped in, those 4 players really should have considered how outmatched they were before they had interrupted. You Zero Wing players sure are bold. You dare spout such nonsense before our team leader, Remnant. You must be tired of living. A level 102 Tier 2 Ranger mocked, sneering at Shifeng's group. Their commander had long since ordered all of the adventurer team's members to kill any Zero Wing members on sight. Unfortunately, since Zero Wing held the northern fortress and could use return scrolls to teleport to it, Warblood's members had found their targets difficult to ambush in the fields. However, Warblood's team had sealed off the Molten Canyon. Not only was communication with the outside world impossible, but they had also rendered teleportation tools such as return scrolls unusable. Killing any Zero Wing members they encountered would be a piece of cake. Remnant. We are your targets. There's no need to involve outsiders. If you think you can take me, let's fight. I want to see how strong you've grown after becoming a Berserker King for myself. Cleansing Flame, the female Guardian Knight leading Heaven's Blades team, shouted to Remnant Snow, the Berserker King leading Warblood's team. She knew that escape was no longer possible for her team. Aside from how badly outnumbered they were, Remnant Snow was more than powerful enough to annihilate her entire team. She had already witnessed the strength of Tier 3 players, and she knew that Tier 2 players had no hope against them. She was grateful that Zero Wing's members were so willing to help her, but she couldn't let them die for their good intentions. You actually think you qualify to challenge our leader to a one-on-one match, Flame? The level 102 ranger from Warblood disdainfully asked Cleansing Flame. You might be strong, but our leader has already reached Tier 3. Even your vice commanders would have to think twice before challenging him. There's only one way we'll let your team leave in peace. You just have to hand over all of your weapons and equipment. If you do, we might reconsider cursing you with double the death penalty and sending you all back to level 99. As the Tier 2 Ranger ended his threat, the various major power spectators turned to Remnant Snow in awe. More players had begun to reach Tier 3, but most of them were peak experts from the various superpowers. Ordinary experts simply weren't strong enough to complete their Tier 3 promotion quests this soon. In fact, many players might never reach Tier 3. Tier 3 players were on an entirely different level compared to Tier 2 players. Even superpowers upper echelons had to treat Tier 3 players respectfully. Cleansing Flame might be one of the top-ranked team leaders from Heaven's Blade, but she doesn't qualify to challenge Remnant Snow. I wonder when I'll finally reach Tier 3 too? Reaching Tier 3 isn't so easy. Remnant Snow just got lucky. It's a pity that Cleansing Flame had chosen such a high difficulty for her promotion quest. If she had chosen a lower difficulty, she'd probably be a Tier 3 player right now. Cleansing Flame and those 4 Zero Wing members are dead for sure. Against a Tier 3 Berserker King, even a 100-man team of Tier 2 experts is nothing but cannon fodder. The various major powers experts couldn't help their rueful sighs as they watched Cleansing Flame and her team. Times had changed and it was no longer the era of Tier 2 players. The time of quantity over quality had ended. This era belonged to Tier 3 players, and before them Tier 2 players were nothing. A Tier 3 expert could even take out Tier 2 Apex experts in just a few moves. As Cleansing Flame waited for Remnant Snow's reply, she noticed that the Berserker was staring at the leader of Zero Wing's small group with a foreboding look on his face. It piqued her curiosity. Is something wrong, leader? The Tier 2 Ranger asked, giving Remnant Snow a strange look. Normally, Remnant Snow was quite outspoken. He had recently been promoted to team leader in Warblood, in addition to reaching Tier 3. He was now one of the candidates to become one of the adventurer team's new vice commanders. This was the prime of his life. Why else would he have been so arrogant in his exchange with Cleansing Flame? However, before the Tier 2 Ranger could continue, Remnant Snow pulled away from his team and approached Zero Wing's players. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You, Zero Wing's members, are doomed now. It seems Remnant Snow intends to take care of those Zero Wing fools himself. The various major powers experts gave Shifeng's group pitying glances as Remnant Snow made his move. Cleansing Flame, on the other hand, paled. She wanted to stop the man, but with several hundred Warblood members in her way, rushing forward would accomplish nothing. Just as the spectators expected Remnant Snow to attack, the man in question expressed his respect for Shifeng as he reached Zero Wing's 4 players. Guild leader Black Flame, you jest. How could I show such disrespect to your request? We'll allow them to leave, Remnant Snow said. He then barked an order for Warblood's members to open a path for Cleansing Flame and her team to leave the Molten Canyon unhindered. Chapter 2407 Hidden Terror. When Remnant Snow commanded his team to give way, both the spectating experts and Heaven's Blades members were stupefied. What was going on? Had Remnant Snow hit his head at some point? Even Warblood's members gaped at Remnant Snow. They even wondered if this were some imposter. Why else would he show respect to Zero Wing's guild leader? Warblood had an irreconcilable feud with Zero Wing, and the two organizations frequently clashed in the Gravity Mountain range. Although Zero Wing's guild leader was a Tier 3 player, Remnant Snow was a Tier 3 Berserker King. He shouldn't have any reason to treat Shifeng respectfully. Not a single player watching the scene could understand why Remnant Snow behaved as he did. Are you deaf? Why aren't you moving? Remnant Snow snarled as his team members stared at him. Seeing his rage, Warblood's members followed their orders and opened a path for Cleansing Flame's team, regardless of how confused they were. When the watching experts saw this, they were utterly flabbergasted. At first they had wondered if they had misheard Remnant Snow, but after watching Warblood's members move aside and let Cleansing Flame's team pass, they had to accept the odd situation as fact. I'll thank you in their place then, Team Leader Remnant. I still have other matters to deal with, so I'll be heading out, Shifeng said. Remnant Snow's behavior had surprised him too, but since the man had taken a step back, it'd be in poor taste if Shifeng escalated the situation. Thus, he decided to continue on his way into the Molten Canyon after a polite response. Remnant Snow couldn't help but breathe a deep sigh of relief as he watched Shifeng's group walk off. Others might not realize how powerful Shifeng was, but he had experienced the swordsman's astonishing might for himself. Shifeng had caused a huge scene on Tranquil Mine Island even before he had reached Tier 3. He had then slain Blood Oath, who had been protected by several of his bodyguards and one of the adventurer team's vice commanders, within the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's residence. And yet Shifeng had still slain Blood Oath. The swordsman was inhumanly strong. Now that Shifeng had reached Tier 3, he had undoubtedly become even more terrifying. Remnant Snow had no wish to provoke such a monster. Even among Tier 3 players there were still differences. Reaching Tier 3 did not grant invincibility. Are we really letting them go, leader? The higher-ups have made it clear that we are under no circumstances allowed to let Cleansing Flame's team leave the Molten Canyon, the Tier 2 ranger whispered to his team leader. Even if Black Flame is Tier 3, there are plenty of us here and we have a battle array. Do we really have to fear Black Flame? Tier 3 players were powerful, but that did not mean that Tier 2 players had no way to retaliate. Even if they couldn't defeat a Tier 3 expert, they could put up a good fight with their 100-man large-scale battle array. If Remnant Snow joined the fray, it wouldn't be impossible to defeat Shifeng. Yet Remnant Snow had ordered them to allow Cleansing Flame's team to leave without a fight. Warblood's upper echelons definitely wouldn't tolerate this insubordination. That is true. I am confident that I could hold my ground against Black Flame with the help of a battle array, but do you truly believe that he's only a Tier 3 player? Remnant Snow said as he rolled his eyes at his vice team leader. Didn't you see the 3 players behind him? Even if they are all Tier 3 players, we can buy enough time for our other Tier 3 experts and Starlink's Tier 3 experts to arrive. Winning that battle isn't necessarily impossible, the ranger insisted. Although Tier 3 players were still rare at this stage, Warblood and Starlink had a few. Surrendering without a fight would tarnish Warblood's reputation. So what if they make it here? Remnant Snow shot back, chuckling. You're aware that I learned a special skill after I completed my Tier 3 promotion, right? With this skill I can see through Black Cloak's concealment effects. Do you know what those players' levels and equipment standards are? How strong could they possibly be? Are they level 105 players in level 100 Dark Gold set equipment? The Tier 2 ranger offhandedly mocked the notion. He knew about Remnant Snow's identification skill. That skill was the reason Warblood had ordered the Berserker King to guard the Molten Canyon's exit in the first place. With him running the show, Heaven's Blades members wouldn't be able to sneak out of the Molten Canyon with black cloaks. At this point, Tier 3 experts' equipment standards weren't much higher than Tier 2 players. Most Tier 3 experts were still wearing level 100 epic equipment. A player would only have a distinct advantage if they equipped level 100 Dark Gold set equipment, but obtaining that kind of equipment was nigh impossible for current players. More experts were reaching Tier 3, but not a single power had enough Tier 3 players to raid level 100 team dungeons, And because of that, obtaining level 100 plus top-tier equipment was still extremely difficult. Players could grind level 100 plus Grand Lords, but the best equipment those field bosses would drop would be fine gold rank. Bingo, Remnant Snow said, chuckling. Not only have they reached level 105, but they're even wearing dark gold set equipment. Level 105? Level 100 dark gold set equipment? How is that possible? The Tier 2 Ranger exclaimed, astonished. Level 100 dark gold set equipment? Shaking his head, Remnant Snow revealed an envious expression as he said, they're not wearing level 100 dark gold set equipment. They're wearing level 105 dark gold set equipment. Impossible. How can they have possibly acquired such items? Stupefied, the Ranger refused to believe his leader's claim. Obtaining level 100 dark gold set equipment was an unbelievable feat at the moment, and obtaining level 105 dark gold set equipment was an utter joke. Yet that was what Remnant Snow had seen after using his special identification skill, so it must be absolute truth. Furthermore, the Ranger had no reason to doubt his leader. Remnant Snow was fighting to become a vice commander. He wouldn't benefit in the least from iFlame's team go. As Remnant Snow had said, even if Warblood and Starlink sent Tier 3 experts as reinforcements, they'd be nothing but a joke against those 4 Zero Wing members. Why else would I have let Cleansing Flame's team leave without a fuss? Remnant Snow asked, rolling his eyes. As he stared at Shurfeng's departing figure, a trace of fear flashed in his eyes. There was one bit of information he hadn't revealed, the fact that he hadn't gleaned the slightest detail regarding Shurfeng. When he had stood before the swordsman, it had felt as if he were trying to stare down a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Honestly, the Tier 2 Ranger silently celebrated his leader's wisdom. Had they started a fight with those players, they all would have died. As Shurfeng's group passed, delving deeper into the Molten Canyon unhindered, the various experts in the area gaped in shock. Leader, is Zero Wing's Black Flame really that powerful of a player? Remnant Snow actually stepped aside out of respect for him. The level 101 female cleric beside Cleansing Flame asked, confused and stunned. Even the various superpowers feared Tier 3 players, yet Remnant Snow had conceded after a few words from Shurfeng. It was utterly unbelievable. I don't know exactly how powerful Guild Leader Black Flame is, but I know that this is an opportunity for us, Cleansing Flame said, excitement flashing in her eyes after seeing Remnant Snow's extraordinarily respectful display before Shurfeng. She immediately tried to catch up with the small Zero Wing group. None of Heaven's Blade's members knew what she was up to. Guild Leader Black Flame, I am Cleansing Flame, one of Heaven's Blade's team leaders. Thank you for saving us. If you hadn't come along, we would have died here, Cleansing Flame sincerely thanked Shurfeng. It was just a small effort on my part. There's no need to be so polite, Team Leader Flame, Shurfeng said. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shurfeng hadn't intended to save Cleansing Flame's team. He had just wanted to spoil Warblood's fun. He had hoped that Remnant Snow would attack him, and he could use the chance to wipe out some of Warblood's members. He certainly hadn't expected the Berserker King to concede. It had left him with no choice but to abandon his original plan. Guild Leader Black Flame, may I request your help in saving our trapped commander? If you're willing to save our commander and her team, Heaven's Blade will offer this item as compensation, Cleansing Flame said as she revealed an ancient, withered tree branch. The branch didn't look like anything special, but it radiated a timeless aura. Moreover, it contained a powerful life force. The Tree of Life. When he saw that special tree branch, Shurfeng couldn't help his shock. Chapter 2408, Elven Race's Divine Artifact. You really are amazing, Guild Leader Black Flame. You recognized it at a glance. Cleansing Flame praised the swordsman, a little surprised when Shurfeng identified the tree branch. Heaven's Blade had tried all sorts of methods to appraise the branch but failed to learn anything. In the end, they had only discovered the tree branch's identity after using an ancient appraisal scroll. And yet Shurfeng had known what the branch was after a quick glance. It was unbelievable. Everyone in God's domain knew about the Tree of Life, the elves' divine artifact, but there was very little information available about the tree itself. The most the average player knew about the Tree of Life was that it produced the Fruit of Life. The Fruit of Life was a sacred item that could resurrect NPCs, as well as a treasure that could drastically improve a living creature's potentials. Even kings and emperors coveted the Fruit of Life. It's no wonder why Warblood is out to get you and willing to go as far as to seal off the Molten Canyon. Shifeng realized what the previous encounter had been about when he saw the tree branch in Cleansing Flame's hand. That's right. Warblood found out about the tree branch and is doing everything it can to target us in the ancient ruin. Unfortunately, our commander is still trapped in the ruin, and we aren't strong enough to save her, Cleansing Flame said, clenching her teeth. However, that branch isn't one of the Tree of Life's main branches, just a side branch, Shifeng calmly deduced. Moreover, I'm guessing that you have more than 2 or 3 side branches on your hands. I suspect you also have a main branch. How did you know? Cleansing Flame was flabbergasted. Only a handful of people in Heaven's Blade knew how many branches the adventurer team had and what kind they were. Although the Tree of Life's branches are precious, they're not valuable enough to push Warblood to such drastic measures. Besides, your willingness to offer a side branch as payment tells me that you have many more, Shifeng explained. At this point, no player in God's domain knew more about the Tree of Life than Shifeng. The Tree of Life side branches were valuable treasures, each worth multiple pieces of level 100+ epic equipment. These side branches could be cultivated to grow into a Tree of Life, and as long as they did, it would produce Water of Life. The tree wouldn't produce much Water of Life and it would take a long time, but the liquid was immensely valuable. It was, after all, one of the few items in God's domain that could resurrect an NPC. It was even effective on Tier 5 NPCs. However, cultivating a Tree of Life from a side branch wasn't easy, not to mention producing Water of Life. One would need to sacrifice astronomical resources to accomplish the feat. Even if Warblood wanted the side branch, it wouldn't be desperate enough to seal off the Molten Canyon to get it. The only explanation was that Heaven's Blade had acquired one of the Tree of Life's main branches. The main branches were extraordinary and even more valuable than ordinary legendary items. As long as one cultivated a Tree of Life from a main branch, the tree would be capable of producing Fruit of Life. Fruits of Life were just as valuable as fragmented legendary items. Thus, it was easy to imagine how valuable a Tree of Life, which could produce an endless supply of the fruit, would be. Even super guilds would sacrifice everything to get their hands on a main branch. Hearing Shifeng's explanation, realization dawned on Cleansing Flame. Shifeng's deduction was correct. Warblood had discovered that Heaven's Blade had a main branch from the Tree of Life, which was why it so furiously targeted Heaven's Blade. With no other choice, her commander Zhou had sent her with the side branch to find outside help. These branches weren't ordinary items and they were guaranteed to drop on death. Her commander wouldn't have been in such a precarious position otherwise. If you're hoping that Zero Wing will save your commander just for a side branch, I'm afraid that I have to refuse. I'm sure you're aware of how crazy and powerful Warblood is, not to mention its partnership with Starlink. I doubt any superpower would be willing to offend Warblood. Even if you offered me 2 or 3 side branches, I'd have to refuse, Shifeng told Cleansing Flame with a serious look. However, it's not impossible to afford Zero Wing's help. We want one of the main branches. That's the bottom line to purchase Zero Wing's help in rescuing your commander. He did not particularly care about the Tree of Life's side branches. He could easily find replacements for the Water of Life. The main branch, however, was a different story. Not only could the main branch provide fruits of life, but it could also yield nuclei of life. The nucleus of life was one of the required materials to produce the broken steel set equipment. It was also the most difficult material to acquire. If he could secure a source of nuclei of life, he could forge his class set equipment. An epic class-specific set equipment. Even during his previous life, very few of the various superpowers experts had obtained epic set equipment. Most had only worn an assortment of epic equipment. With the broken steel set equipment, he could roam through the truly dangerous areas of God's domain and hunt down the 3 remaining fragments of Solomon's sword. With his current strength, he only had a 10% chance of surviving in these locations, and that was only because he had the Disintegration armor, which could temporarily elevate him into a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Without the Disintegration armor, he had no chance of surviving whatsoever. Only an epic set equipment could increase his survival chances. Only the extremely lucky could find enough fragmented legendary items for the task, and he couldn't afford to rely on luck. A main branch. Cleansing Flame hesitated after hearing Shifeng's demand. As a mere team leader, she didn't have the authority to make that decision. Heaven's Blade had only secured one main branch, and if they gave it to Zero Wing, the adventurer team would suffer a huge loss. Furthermore, protecting the main branch in their possession was the very reason that her commander was struggling so desperately. She would have already offered the side branches to appease war blood otherwise. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. However, Cleansing Flame couldn't deny what Shifeng had said. Not only was War Blood Dragonheart Island's #1 adventurer team, but it also had Starlink's support. No superpower on the island would be willing to offend War Blood for a mere side branch from the Tree of Life. Guild leader Black Flame, I'm afraid I can't agree to that. I need to discuss the matter with my commander, Cleansing Flame said after giving the matter some thought. Rather than rejecting Shifeng's demand outright, she felt it was wisest to speak with her commander first. I understand, Shifeng said, not particularly surprised by Cleansing Flame's response. Cleansing Flame was only a team leader. How could someone of that rank possibly have the authority to make such an important decision? With Shifeng's agreement, Cleansing Flame logged out of God's domain to contact her commander offline. The offline messenger was the only way to communicate within Heaven's Blade now that War Blood had sealed off the Molten Canyon. Chapter 2409, Thunder Eagle Reappears Molten Ruin, Inner Corridor. A team with fewer than 50 members fended off 2 level 106 Grand Lord ranked Guardian Knights while desperately trying to retreat toward the Molten Ruin's inner corridor. Although the team had so few members, as many as 8 of them were Tier 3 experts, including the female Guardian Knight that stood 1.9 meters tall and single-handedly held her ground against the 2 Grand Lords. She wore black and white runic armor, carried a shield engraved with dark runes in one hand, and wielded a 2-handed sword in the other. This female Guardian Knight's outstanding performance was the only reason that the other Tier 3 players on the team could focus on stopping the dozen or so Great Lord-ranked mechanical puppets, allowing the rest of the team to pull back safely. The Guardian Knight was none other than Zwei, Heaven's Blade's famous commander and the very soul of the adventurer team. Suddenly, a level 101 Tier 3 assassin appeared beside Zwei, reporting, "Commander, I've just received an offline message from Cleansing Flame. She says that she ran into Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame. After negotiations, Black Flame stated that his price for rescuing us is one of the Tree of Life's main branches." The team members fell silent when they heard the assassin's statement. "What a big appetite," a level 102 Tier 3 berserker snarled. "We're fighting so desperately to survive in the main corridor to protect the main branch, yet Zero Wing wants it in exchange for saving us? If we just give it to Zero Wing, we'll have wasted all of our efforts." "That's right. We might as well offer it to War Blood or some other superpower. At least they'll have a better chance of saving us," a Tier 3 elementalist said, nodding in agreement. The rest of the team expressed their disapproval as well. They had gone to great lengths to protect the main branch. There was no way they'd hand it over to Zero Wing. If they had to give it away in exchange for their safety, they'd be better off making a trade with a true superpower. They'd be far more confident of a superpower saving them than Zero Wing. "Shadow, what do you think of this?" Zwei asked the Tier 3 assassin next to her. When she spoke, Zwei's voice sounded sacred and the entire team quieted down. Everyone perked up and waited to hear their vice commander's opinion on the matter. "I'm afraid that keeping the Tree of Life's main branch will be too much of a challenge for us, Commander, and the side branches aren't nearly attractive enough to the various superpowers. No one will offend War Blood for a few side branches," Divine Shadow, the Tier 3 assassin, said. "However, I think we'll have more options if we use the main branch as a bargaining chip." "What do you suggest we do?" Zwei asked calmly. "We definitely cannot allow War Blood to benefit from our work. Zero Wing's help is negligible as well, and we can't rely on most superpowers. I've just received an offline message from 13 Thrones. I don't know how they found out, but they know we have the Tree of Life's main branch. They're willing to help us. Not only will they send reinforcements to get us out of here, but they'll also provide protection and conveniences on Dragonheart Island in the future as long as we give them the main branch," Divine Shadow said. No one was happy with it, but they understood Divine Shadow's reasoning. The Molten Ruin was extremely dangerous. Although Dragonheart Island's various superpowers were here to find horned eagle eggs, most of them couldn't get past the ruin's outer region. Very few superpowers were strong enough to explore the inner region. Heaven's Blade's team had only managed to make it that far by relying on special means. Although Zero Wing's peak combatants were no weaker than those from the various superpowers, if the superpowers couldn't set foot in the inner region, Zero Wing's experts wouldn't be able to either. 13 Thrones was their only reliable option now. After listening to her vice commander's view, Svi fell silent as she considered her options. Her team waited silently for her decision, but they wouldn't hesitate to follow their commander's orders, regardless of what she decided. "All right, let's go with your suggestion," Svi said. "I'll notify 13 Thrones then," Divine Shadow said as he prepared to back out of the game. "Notify Cleansing Flame as well. Tell her that if Zero Wing can reach us first, Heaven's Blade will offer Zero Wing the main branch." "Tell 13 Thrones the same thing," Svi said after giving the matter some thought. "Understood." Divine Shadow nodded before disappearing from the corridor. Warblood was persistent in chasing their team in the inner corridor, and as they delved deeper into the Molten Ruin, they'd encounter more danger. Their team could only survive for a short time. They couldn't just rely on 13 Thrones' promise to save them. Moreover, Zero Wing had done the adventurer team a favor when it had saved Cleansing Flame's team. Outright refusing the guild wouldn't be wise. Although Zero Wing had a slim chance of reaching their team, at least it had a chance to compete against 13 Thrones with equal conditions. Once Divine Shadow had logged out, he notified Cleansing Flame and 13 Thrones representative of Svi's decision. Whichever guild reached Svi's team first would become Heaven's Blade's business partner. Meanwhile, Shifeng and his entourage rested in a dense forest within the Molten Canyon while they waited for Cleansing Flame to log back into God's domain. "Guild leader Black Flame, if you can reach our commander before 13 Thrones, she'll agree to your demands. I hope you can understand," Cleansing Flame apologized after returning to the game. Naturally, 13 Thrones had more members in the Molten Ruin than Zero Wing. The superpower had long since dispatched a large force of experts to the ruin to search for homed eagle eggs. In fact, it had been the first guild to send experts into the Molten Ruin's inner region. Ordinary expert teams had no place in the Molten Ruin's inner region. Even with more than 20 Tier 3 experts leading its team, 13 Thrones had taken nearly 3 hours to reach the inner corridor. The monsters that guarded the path to the inner region were immensely powerful, and ordinary superpowers were utterly powerless against them. Heaven's Blade's team had only reached the inner region by relying on special means. In contrast to 13 Thrones' team, which was already in the area, Zero Wing's main force hadn't even gathered in the Molten Canyon yet. By the time the team arrived, 13 Thrones would have secured her commander's team. Shifeng had saved her team, but Cleansing Flame knew she couldn't change her commander's mind. This concerned the adventurer team's survival after all. "I understand. The survival of your adventurer team comes first. Commander Svi has made a wise decision," Shifeng said, chuckling. He knew what Heaven's Blade was trying to pull. "I just want to clarify, you're saying that if Zero Wing's members reach your commander and rescue her first, she'll hand us the Tree of Life's main branch, right?" "I believe that's the case." The question confused Cleansing Flame a little, but she nodded after finding no flaws in Shifeng's statement. "That will make things simple," Shifeng said, smiling. "Would you be willing to sign a contract with Zero Wing regarding this matter? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You simple." Cleansing Flame was even more confused, but she agreed to sign the contract. Her commander had already agreed to the conditions, and there was no harm in her representing her commander and adventurer team on the contract. Cleansing Flame and Shifeng signed a contract while one of her subordinates reported back to Heaven's Blade's commander. "Since that's taken care of, let's go," Shifeng said, satisfied with the contract. Go? Go where?" "To save your commander, of course," Shifeng said, smiling. He then took out the Thunder Eagle's summoning flute and summoned the flying mount. A gigantic eagle with a wingspan of over 20 meters appeared above the forest with a deafening screech that echoed throughout the Molten Canyon. Chapter 24:10 Rescue Team? The surrounding players immediately noticed the Thunder Eagle's appearance. A flying mount. What a powerful flying mount. Based on its aura, it's as strong as a level 100 Great Lord. Too cool. When will I get to ride a flying mount like that? The various major powers fell into a heated discussion when they noticed the Thunder Eagle, visibly envious. If not for the fact that summoning flutes occupied a bag space and had an abysmally low chance of dropping, they would have charged forth to try to steal the flying mount. So, this is the rumored Thunder Eagle? Cleansing Flame stared at the massive bird of prey as it descended. Although the various superpowers Heaven's Blade included were searching for homed eagle eggs in the Molten Ruin, none of them had a clear idea of what a flying mount was. They had only ever seen the creature on a video. Seeing the Thunder Eagle in person, Cleansing Flame thought it was even more majestic than a private plane. Hop on. There are too many monsters on the way. We'll get there faster by air. Shifeng invited Cleansing Flame on the Thunder Eagle's back after jumping on himself. Although the Molten Canyon was a dangerous area, players could fly if they had the means. Shifeng had only refrained from using his flying mount because of how incredibly conspicuous it was. If he had flown into the Molten Canyon, everyone would have immediately realized that Zero Wing's guild leader was in the area. But he no longer cared about hiding his identity. The Tree of Life's main branch was of utmost importance, and the only way his small team would reach the Molten Ruin quickly was by flying on the Thunder Eagle. Moreover, since Warblood had sealed off the Molten Canyon, players within the canyon couldn't use their in-game communication system, which made it easier for Shifeng to hide his tracks. With Shifeng's invite, Cleansing Flame and the few surviving members of her team climbed aboard the magnificent Thunder Eagle. Once everyone was on its back, the Thunder Eagle flapped its wings and swiftly ascended several hundred meters into the air. It then flew straight toward the Molten Ruin. This flying mount is amazing, leader. If we could get a few for ourselves, our leveling speed would skyrocket. A level 101 assassin beside Cleansing Flame exclaimed as he watched the scenery pass below him. Indeed. With this movement speed and maneuverability, reaching distant level 100 plus maps would be a lot easier, Cleansing Flame agreed, nodding. As she glanced down at the level 100 plus monsters roaming the forest below, she more or less understood how beneficial a flying mount could be. It also explained how Zero Wing had become so powerful. If they had the help of a flying mount, they could explore and grind in a level 100 neutral map twice per day. They could spend nearly double the time grinding than if they traveled via land mounts. It was no wonder how Zero Wing had nurtured so many Tier 3 players so quickly. On the Thunder Eagle's back, the trip that should have taken them 2 hours was over in a dozen minutes or so. During that time, Cleansing Flame and her teammates had felt as if they were dreaming. It had taken them a lot of effort and plenty of sacrifice to fight their way from the Molten Ruin to the Molten Canyon's exit. Yet without enduring a single battle, they returned to the ruin. They had even recovered some of their stamina during the trip as if their earlier battles had been nothing more than a passing dream. Guild Leader Black Flame, our adventurer team has thoroughly explored the Molten Ruin's outer region, so we know the path to the inner area. We can guide you there. We also have plenty of members stationed on the path to the inner area, so they should be able to help, Cleansing Flame suggested. Shifeng had saved her team, so she owed him a big favor. Since he intended to race 13 thrones to her commander, she would help him in whatever way she could. Moreover, they'd have a greater chance of victory with more players if they stumbled across Warblood's members. I'll have to trouble you then, Shifeng said. I'll contact them now. They should be assembled by the time we reach the cavern that leads to the inner region, Cleansing Flame replied. She then instructed one of her team members to log off and notify Heaven's Blade's other members within the Molten Ruin's outer region. Cleansing Flame then directed Shifeng and his entourage to the entrance of the Molten Ruin's inner region. In the Molten Ruin, even full teams of level 100 plus experts in level 100 mysterious iron equipment risked a team wipe. The outer area was crawling with level 100 Great Lord ranked blue-eyed spiders. A team would occasionally come across level 100 Grand Lord ranked demonic flame spiders as well. These monsters were a major challenge for Tier 2 players. The blue-eyed spiders weren't a big issue, but only death awaited them if they ran into the demonic flame spiders. Fortunately, Cleansing Flame's team had long since familiarized themselves with the outer region, and they guided Shifeng's team around the Grand Lords. At most, the group dealt with a few blue-eyed spiders on the way. Shifeng's group hadn't even needed to lift a finger throughout the journey. Cleansing Flame and her team members used traps to slow the blue-eyed spiders down, which allowed the group to escape the monster's pursuit. After just half an hour, Shifeng and the others arrived in a town-sized cavern. Azure crystals decorated the cavern ceiling, radiating a blinding light that illuminated the cavern. A steel tunnel that was more than a dozen meters across led out of one corner of the cavern. A frightening aura seeped from the tunnel, and Shifeng and his companions could even sense it from several hundred yards away. The aura was extraordinary. A Tier 1 player wouldn't even be able to approach the tunnel, and Tier 2 players would feel extremely uncomfortable as they got near, with the aura partially restricting their movements. However, quite a few players had gathered at the mouth of the tunnel. Shifeng counted more than 10,000 players with a rough glance, all of which were from the various superpowers expert teams. These players were high-leveled and well-equipped. Quite a few of them were even peak experts, wearing multiple pieces of epic equipment. Shifeng also spotted several dozen Tier 3 experts. Among the players, Shifeng noticed a team wearing capes with Heaven's Blades emblem. The team wasn't particularly large, with only a little over 100 members, but their equipment standards were very high. Many of the team members were experts in level 100 secret silver equipment. The team was also one of the more eye-catching groups standing near the tunnel. Luo, you guys sure got here quickly. We've rushed here as fast as we could, yet you still beat us, Cleansing Flame said to the Tier 3 female cleric leading Heaven's Blades team in greeting. The female cleric was delicate and pretty. Although she had a small frame and looked harmless, none of Heaven's Blades experts dared to look down on her. Rather, traces of fear and reverence flashed in their eyes when they looked at her. You're finally here. If you'd taken any longer, I would have challenged the path already, the female cleric named Luo said cheerfully when she saw Cleansing Flame. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You, Guild Leader Black Flame, let me introduce you. This is Luo, Heaven's Blades Chief Cleric. She is one of the top 5 clerics on Dragonheart Island, Cleansing Flame introduced. Luo, this is Guild Leader Black Flame. Guild Leader Black Flame is amazing. He even convinced Remnant Snow to spare us with just a few words. Greetings, Guild Leader Black Flame, Luo said. After hearing Cleansing Flame's introduction, she gave Shifeng a careful, evaluating look. A moment passed and she got straight to the point, asking, "May I know when your team will arrive? Our commander's situation isn't looking good. I'm not sure how much longer they can evade Warblood's pursuit. I'd like to move out as soon as possible." In consideration for the team in the Molten Ruins outer region, Svi had instructed Luo to remain in that area. As a result, Luo hadn't been able to help her comrades when Warblood's experts had attacked. If the inner corridor hadn't been so dangerous, even for the various superpowers' main forces, she would have long since rushed to her commander's aid. "Commander's aid. My team's here already. We can get moving when you're ready." Chapter 24:11 Commotion at the Molten Ruin. Shifeng's statement stunned Heaven's Blades members. Even Cleansing Flame and her team, who had led Shifeng to the cavern, stared at him in shock, not to mention Luo and her people. The passage to the Molten Ruins inner area was incredibly dangerous. Even superpowers sent teams of several hundred main force members to ensure the team survived the path, and their survival still wasn't certain. The superpowers teams that had made it through the path had merely gotten lucky. Cleansing Flame had assumed Shifeng must have notified Zero Wings members within the Molten Ruin to join them. She had never thought that he intended to enter the ruin's inner region with just his 3 companions. It was utterly insane. "Do you know how dangerous this passage is, Guild Leader Black Flame?" Luo asked after taking a moment to calm down. Seeing his serious expression, she continued, "Even the superpowers teams, which have 400 main force members, have less than a 50% chance of surviving the trip through the passage. If you really intend to go in there with just 4 people, I'm afraid that I cannot accompany you." If Shifeng hadn't done Heaven's Blade a favor by saving Cleansing Flame, Luo would have likely erupted at him. Because of Warblood, her team was already in a tight spot. She had only agreed to take the risk of returning to the passage because she had heard that Zero Wings guild leader was willing to save her commander. Due to that decision, her team had suffered several dozen casualties. And now, Shifeng insisted that he only intended to rescue her commander with 4 players, as if the Molten Ruin were his own backyard. "It's a pity that team leader Luo isn't willing to come with us. Kola, get ready. We're heading in," Shifeng said, unfazed by Luo's response. "Understood." Kola was excited to head out, and without hesitation he approached the tunnel's entrance. Helplessly, Turtledove and Shadow Sword followed after him. Heaven's Blades members were again dumbfounded as they watched Zero Wings members. They hadn't actually thought Shifeng was serious about going in with just 4 players. "Luo, you went too far. Guild leader Black Flame is only entering the inner area to save our commander, Cleansing Flame hissed. Moreover, he's only recently arrived in the Molten Ruin. He doesn't know much about the ruin yet. This disagreement didn't bode well for either side. Yuluo wanted to rescue her commander as quickly as possible, and that would be easier with more allies, especially if those allies were Tier 3 experts like Shifeng and his comrades. However, since Yuluo had taken her stance, Shifeng's group wouldn't want to work with her team. I understand what you're trying to say, but you know that reaching the inner area is impossible with 4 players. It'd be better for us to look for other options rather than waste our time trying, Yuluo growled back as she watched Shifeng's departing figure. Sneering, she continued, I know a little about Black Flame too. He has relied on his advantage as a Tier 3 player to suppress the various superpowers, but times have changed. Not a single superpower doesn't have a Tier 3 player now, yet most of them still can't get through that tunnel. Since Black Flame is so insistent, we should let him find out how dangerous that tunnel is. Once he hits a wall, he'll realize that he has to cooperate. If we don't, and he still insists on taking the lead, we'd be lucky if Zero Wings members aren't just extra baggage. Yuluo acknowledged that Shifeng was a powerful individual, but they were talking about venturing deeper into the Molten Ruin, which was even more dangerous than level 100 neutral maps. If Shifeng had shown up with a large number of Zero Wings main force members, there wouldn't have been an issue, but he had only arrived with 3 companions, and Yuluo refused to let him take charge. When her commander's team had entered the inner region, Warblood hadn't sealed off the Molten Canyon yet, and she had received plenty of information about what to expect in that area. She wouldn't allow Shifeng to lead her team blindly. Alright, stay here then. I'll lead the way for them, Cleansing Flame said, sighing. Although Yuluo had a point, she was responsible for asking Shifeng to save their commander. She couldn't abandon Zero Wing. She walked away from her fellow team leader and followed Shifeng's group to the tunnel. Cleansing Flame is too soft. How are those 4 from Zero Wing going to listen to us if we don't let them suffer a little? Yuluo shook her head in exasperation as she watched Cleansing Flame walk off. She then turned to her 2 vice team leaders and said, Speak with the superpowers in the area. Tell them that Heaven's Blade will offer information about the passage, and we're willing to work with them to get to the inner corridor. Yuluo had no hopes for Zero Wing's 4 players. As far as she was concerned, their only hope for reaching their commander was to cooperate with the other superpowers in the cavern. She'd let Shifeng know how laughable his 4-man rescue attempt was. Having received their orders, Yuluo's 2 vice team leaders got to work and began to speak with other superpowers. Meanwhile, a team of several hundred players emerged from the tunnel, and they were all in miserable shape. What? Even the Flamehammer Adventurer team failed. The players waiting outside of the passage began to despair when they saw the players return to the cavern. Flamehammer was the 3rd-ranked adventurer team on Dragonheart Island, and it had sent 14 of its Tier 3 players to fight through the passage. Yet even their powerful team had failed to reach the inner corridor. The team had gone in with 500 members, but only returned with 300. In addition, only 8 of the Tier 3 experts had survived the expedition. The loss was devastating for Flamehammer. Look at them and realize how immature you're being, Yuluo thought, chuckling as she glanced back at Shifeng. However, Shifeng reacted as if he didn't see Flamehammer's team and continued toward the tunnel without any hesitation. As he and his 3 comrades approached the tunnel with Cleansing Flame in tow, a commotion broke out in the cavern. They're entering the passage with just 5 players? Are they insane? Who are they? Didn't they see that even Flamehammer's team failed to make it through? Isn't that female Guardian Knight Heaven's Blade's Cleansing Flame? I heard that Warblood is going all out to hunt down Heaven's Blade's commander in the inner corridor. They must be going in to save her. But with just 5 people? Are they suicidal? I bet they won't even get past the first Guardian. I guess Heaven's Blade is really doomed. The various superpowers experts discussed Shifeng and his small party, mocking Heaven's Blade. Overhearing it, Yuluo's complexion turned ashen. While everyone badmouthed her adventurer team, a giant statue which had stood 100 yards in the tunnel began to move. Primordial Guard, Elemental Creature, Archaic Species, Grand Lord, Level 105 HP 2 400 000/2 400 000. When the various superpowers experts noticed the Primordial Guard, they were overcome with dread. A level 105 Grand Lord was already a very powerful foe. Even a tier 3 metric tons would struggle to tank a level 105 Grand Lord. And to make matters worse, the Primordial Guard was an archaic species. It had such overpowered strength that it could easily send a tier 3 metric tons flying with an ordinary punch. Moreover, players couldn't use berserk skills while inside the tunnel. Even if they activated their life-saving skills, tier 3 MTs would barely be able to tank the Grand Lord. Many teams had ventured into the tunnel, and every one of them had made plenty of sacrifices to hold the Primordial Guard, allowing the rest of the team to pass. Fortunately, the Primordial Guard only prevented players from entering the tunnel. It didn't prevent players from leaving. Otherwise, teams that retreated from the passage halfway through would have been in for another beating. I wonder if the 5 of them can last more than 20 seconds? 20? Are you kidding me? That's the Primordial Guard we're talking about. Not even tier 3 MTs with active life-saving skills last more than a few hits. I bet they'll survive for 10 seconds at best. I agree. While the players within the canyon chatted about how quickly they thought Shifeng's party would fall, the Primordial Guard had already reached the players in question. It was easily faster than a tier 3 assassin. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Primordial Guard immediately raised a foot and kicked at Shifeng's party. The Grand Lord was a 12-meter-tall giant, and the foot it thrust at Shifeng's party was as large as a small house. Dodging the attack would be impossible for tier 3 players that didn't focus on agility builds. Boom. When the kick struck Shifeng's party, the very ground shook. Contrary to everyone's expectations, however, Shifeng and his companions didn't fly through the air. To the various superpowers experts' shock, the Primordial Guard's foot had stopped just before it had reached Shifeng and the others. Kola, the reason the kick had failed, remained steady in his original position. Chapter 24:12 Frostwolf sets might. This. Impossible. Is that Guardian Knight a monster? Who are they? Not even Zhou Heaven's Blade's strongest MT, is that powerful? The various superpowers experts were indescribably shocked as they watched Kola stop the Primordial Guard's attack without stumbling back in the slightest. For a moment they even wondered if they were hallucinating, but no matter how they rubbed their eyes, the scene before them remained the same. Realizing that this was real, they all wondered about Kola's identity. All of these players had personally experienced the Primordial Guard's strength. The Grand Lord's raw power was unstoppable. Only by rotating 3 or 4 tier 3 MTs could a team hold the monster off long enough for the rest of the team to slip by the Primordial Guard. And yet, Kola single-handedly stopped the Primordial Guard's attack, and he did so without relying on a life-saving skill. Why wouldn't they be shocked? Among the spectating players, no one was more shocked than Yuluo. How is this possible? Yuluo stared at Kola, unable to believe her eyes. She hadn't thought that Zero Wings MT would be this powerful. Heaven's Blade's commander, Zhou, had fought with everything she had to tank the Primordial Guard, and she was one of the top 3 MTs on Dragonheart Island. Her astonishing strength was the reason that so many prideful independent experts were willing to submit to her commands. Before anyone could overcome their shock, the Primordial Guard, seeing that its first attack had failed, thrust its golden spear at Kola with enough power to make space itself tremble. What? It's using its spear already. I thought it only used its spear once players had crossed the halfway mark. All of the players in the cavern were surprised by the Primordial Guard's second attack. They couldn't help the fear they felt when they saw the golden weapon. That golden spear had claimed many tier 3 MTs' lives thus far, giving those players no chance to retaliate. That spear was also the reason that so many superpowers teams had failed to pass the tunnel's first checkpoint. Those that had only done so after suffering tremendous casualties. Come. In contrast, Kola was excited to see the weapon. He immediately raised his Titan Guard to greet the spear in battle. Boom. When the golden spear and Titan Guard collided, the resulting impact stirred an intense storm that spanned over several hundred yards. Kola stumbled back a step as a damage exceeding -30,000 appeared above his head. To tier 3 MTs who possessed nearly 1 million HP, -30,000 was practically negligible, especially for Kola who had 1,540,000 HP thanks to his Frostwolf set and Titan Guard. Seeing Kola block the Primordial Guard's spear, a deathly silence descended on the crowd watching from the tunnel's entrance. Is that Guardian Knight even human? Could he be a tier 3 NPC? Kola had nullified the Primordial Guard's full-powered attack so easily, and he had only lost a little over 30,000 HP in the process. His performance shattered everyone's understanding of Tier 3 MTs. Even the best Tier 3 MTs from the various superpowers could only tank level 100 Grand Lords. Tanking a level 105 Grand Lord would be a major challenge. Every 5 levels in God's domain was a minor turning point after all, even for monsters. Yet Kola had successfully stopped a level 105 Grand Lord ranked archaic species full-powered attack without using a single skill. He was definitely stronger than the best Tier 3 MTs the various superpowers currently possessed. Meanwhile, Yuluo was utterly flabbergasted. The biggest challenge in reaching the inner area was the Primordial Guard's golden spear, but Kola had blocked it and only taken negligible damage. Compared to Yuluo, however, Cleansing Flame, who acted as Shifeng's guide, was shocked senseless. Is this how Zero Wing was able to establish itself in a level 100 neutral map? Although Cleansing Flame knew that Shifeng and the others were very strong, she had never dreamed that they'd be this strong. Kola, stop fooling around. We're in a rush, Shifeng admonished, sending Kola, who was deliberately playing with the Primordial Guard to test the Frostwolf set's effects, a reproachful glance. Shifeng wasn't surprised in the slightest to see Kola stop the Primordial Guard so effortlessly. In fact, he would have been surprised if Kola hadn't stopped the Grand Lord's attacks. During Shifeng's past life, the Frostwolf set had been publicly acknowledged as a top 10 level 120 Dark Gold set equipment in God's domain. Even the various superpowers' old monsters had coveted the set. With this set, defeating a Grand Lord-ranked archaic species of the same level would be child's play. Hearing Shifeng scold his MT, Cleansing Flame wanted to cry. If Kola's frightening performance was just him fooling around, what did that make Heaven's Blade's attempts to stop the Grand Lord? Kola only nodded and suppressed his excitement. He began to block the Primordial Guard's attacks seriously, employing techniques instead of relying on brute strength. The Primordial Guard attacked with its golden spear again, and in response, Kola accurately timed his counter and smashed his shield into the side of the weapon, diverting the spear into a nearby wall. This time, Kola didn't lose a single point of HP after blocking the attack. Kola then jumped up to the Primordial Guard's knee and slashed his saber twice. Combat technique strength combination. The two rapid strikes merged and bit into the Grand Lord's joint. Boom. The powerful attack brought the Primordial Guard to its knees and opened a path that was large enough for a dozen players to pass side by side. Let's go, Shifeng said once the Primordial Guard was temporarily immobilized. Meanwhile, Kola raised his Titan Guard and slammed it down on the Primordial Guard as the Grand Lord was about to stand. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. View Tier 3 Legacy Skill Dragon Strike. The phantom of a crimson dragon's claw struck down the guardian monster. Boom. The sound of an explosion echoed throughout the passage as the impact drove the Primordial Guard into the ground. The spectating crowd was speechless. They merely watched, silent, as Shifeng's party walked past the Grand Lord-ranked archaic species unhindered, eventually disappearing into the tunnel. Chapter 24:13. Pray for themselves. Isn't that Guardian Knight a little too strong? Who is that guy? Where did Heaven's Blade find such a capable MT? With him in the lead, getting to the inner corridor will be at least 20% easier. As the various superpowers experts watched Shifeng's party disappear into the passage, envy welled up within them. Some even took the initiative to chat up Yuluo's team in hopes of working with Kola. In God's domain, MTs were the core of a team. With a powerful enough MT, a team would have a much higher chance of successfully raiding dungeons and exploring ruins. As long as a team could tank a monster, it could kill it. The various teams had already found quite a few horned eagle eggs in the Molten Ruin's outer region already. Needless to say, the Min's inner region would hold even greater treasure. If their teams had an amazing MT like Kola, the team's overall strength would reach a new level, and they'd definitely be able to reach the inner corridor, gaining a massive advantage. Meanwhile, Yuluo and her team stared at the tunnel in stunned silence. Yuluo's expression was particularly gloomy. She had never thought Shifeng's party would be so strong. After Kola's display, she had to re-evaluate what she thought she had known about Tier 3 MTs. They've already gone into the tunnel, leader. What should we do? A level 102 shield warrior quietly asked. They had run all the way here for the sole purpose of entering the inner corridor and rescuing their commander, and they had just missed their best opportunity to do so. Even if they worked with another superpower to get through the tunnel, they wouldn't have more than a 50% chance of success. Even if they made it to the other side, they'd suffer severe losses. The Shield Warrior's question made Yu Luo regret her earlier decision a little. She now knew she had been too impulsive. Had she followed Shifeng's party, her team would have already cleared the first checkpoint and had a much higher chance of reaching their commander. However, all they could do now was stand on this end of the tunnel and watch. But who would have expected Cola to be so powerful? So what if they've entered the passage? I refuse to believe that we can't reach the inner corridor without them. Yu Luo snarled after snapping out of her daze. Reaching the inner corridor was difficult, but it wasn't impossible. Moreover, her team also had the information her commander's team had collected. Avoiding the traps and monsters in the tunnel would be far easier for them, and they had much higher chances of success than any other superpowers team. Yu Luo's statement ignited the rest of her team's fighting spirit. They too wanted to prove to Shifeng's party that they were capable of reaching the inner corridor without Zero Wing's help. After Yu Luo had negotiated with two superpowers and prepared to enter the tunnel, another team entered the cavern. Although this team only consisted of 50 members, it drew the attention of the various superpowers experts, who stared with serious expressions. The new arrival's collective aura was just too powerful. Of the 50 players on the team, 16 had reached Tier 3. The Tier 2 players had all reached level 102 and wore level 100 Secret Silver and pre-level 100 Epic equipment. The team members' equipment standards were off the charts. Demon Palace. They're going in too? Yu Luo's expression became grim when she saw the team. By now, every player on Dragonheart Island knew about Demon Palace. Aside from super guilds, Demon Palace feared no one. Warblood's current strength was the reason the various superpowers were so afraid of the guild. Warblood only used to be Dragonheart Island's third-ranked adventurer team, but after allying with Demon Palace, it had become the island's uncontested top adventurer team. Warblood's rise had been due to the demonic Hellworld's special legacy. At Tier 2, the special legacy provided incredible power, but after reaching Tier 3, experts with the legacy gained even more strength, becoming far more powerful than ordinary Tier 3 classes. After witnessing this, none of the superpowers wanted to provoke Demon Palace. Since Warblood had learned about the Tree of Life's main branch in Heaven's Blade's possession, it was likely that Demon Palace knew of it. While Yu Luo was lost in thought, Demon Palace's team approached her. A robust, middle-aged man who was 2.3 meters tall stepped forward, smirking at Yu Luo. "You're Heaven's Blade's Yu Luo, right? I've heard that you're one of the top 5 healers on Dragonheart Island. That's certainly an impressive feat. Might I ask you to relay a message to your commander?" Evil Qilan, the middle-aged man, said, chuckling. "What do you want me to tell her?" Yu Luo asked. He had a bad feeling about this. Let her know that it's not too late to surrender. But if she continues to refuse until we reach her, it will be too late, Evil Qilan said before turning and leading his team toward the tunnel. He didn't even bother to wait for a reply. As Evil Qilan's team walked away, Heaven's Blade's members fell silent. His tone had been amicable, but they had all sensed the killing intent in his words. "Leader, what should we do now that Demon Palace's members have gone in?" Zero Wing's members and team leader Flame aren't far ahead of them, the level 102 Shield Warrior asked from beside Yu Luo. Evidently, the Demon Palace wanted to join the fray, and Evil Qilan's team wouldn't spare a single Heaven's Blade member they encountered in the inner corridor. The man's request had merely been a warning of their imminent deaths. The Demon Palace had sent 16 Tier 3 experts into the ruins' inner region, and 34 of the 50 team members were Refinement Realm or greater experts. Moreover, every member of the team possessed the demonic Hellworld's special legacy. If Demon Palace's team ran into Shifeng and Cleansing Flame's party, they'd be slaughtered. We can't contact Cleansing Flame to warn her. Zero Wing's members can only pray for their guild leader, Yu Luo said helplessly. Log out immediately and notify the commander of the situation. As for the rest of you, get ready. We're entering the passage. With Yu Luo's command, Heaven's Blade's members joined up with the 2 superpower teams they had partnered with and entered the tunnel. Meanwhile, Demon Palace's team effortlessly pushed through the monsters that had given the various superpowers experts headaches, arriving at the final gate leading to the inner corridor in less than 20 minutes. A magic array sealed the final gate, and players would only obtain the key to remove it by defeating the Guardian boss. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ooh, it looks like someone's just killed the boss, Commander. A Tier 3 ranger reported as he gestured to the steel gate enveloped in fog. The Grand Lord-ranked Guardian boss lay before the gate, and a single player was busy looting the boss while 4 others rested nearby. That saves us a lot of trouble. You two, get rid of them and get me that key, Evil Xian ordered as he glanced at the 2 Tier 3 assassins behind him. Understood. The assassins licked their lips in anticipation and entered stealth. Chapter 24:14. Tough opponent. As the 2 Tier 3 assassins vanished, the other Demon Palace members sat on the ground and rested while watching Shifeng's party in the distance. These players really have some bad luck. They must have gone to great lengths to defeat the Guardian boss, yet they have to deal with Gull and Rainbow right after their raid. We should have just charged over and gotten rid of them. Gull and Rainbow have just reached Tier 3 and unlocked more of their legacy's potential. My guess is that the commander wants to give them a chance to get used to their new bodies. Their basic attributes are on an entirely different level than when they were still Tier 2 after all. Many of the Tier 3 experts from Demon Palace watched the 2 assassins in envy. Their strength had substantially increased after reaching Tier 3 and getting used to it was proving difficult. Although they often sparred with each other, a sparring match couldn't compare to true battle. However, they also knew that Evil Xian wanted to prioritize Wind Gull and White Rainbow's growth. Both assassins had incredible potential for growth. Despite the fact that he was only 27, Wind Gull had already reached the Void Realm. White Rainbow, who was the same age as Wind Gull, had reached the half-step Void Realm standard. Since they had completed their Tier 3 promotion quests so soon, their future was limitless. There would be a massive difference between reaching Tier 3 now and completing the Tier 3 promotion quest in the next 2 weeks. Players would encounter completely different opportunities. This was precisely why Evil Xian prioritized the 2 assassins. Someday they might become domain realm experts and true pillars of the guild. Meanwhile, Wind Gull and White Rainbow used a footwork technique that allowed them to get within 30 yards of Shifeng and his 4 companions without the slightest sound. Rainbow, you take care of that Tier 2 female Guardian Knight. I'll distract the other 2 MTs. Once you get rid of the female Guardian Knight, we'll take our time and play with the others. But you'd better not kill the Tier 3 berserker beside the woman, Wind Gull whispered as he watched Cleansing Flame rest. He didn't care about a Tier 2 player like Cleansing Flame, but to ensure that their training went smoothly, they'd get rid of the miscellaneous target first. Relax. How could I waste an opportunity like this? Hopefully they're not so weak that they die too quickly, White Rainbow whispered back, excitement flashing in his eyes. Opportunities to fight Tier 3 experts were extremely rare right now. Although they could spar in the battle arenas around God's domain, it was impossible to push themselves without the threat of the system's death penalty. Moreover, every player had their own combat style and they could only rapidly improve by fighting different opponents. Let's begin, Wind Gull declared. He started to sneak toward the 2 resting Tier 3 MTs and waited for White Rainbow to make his move. White Rainbow adjusted his footwork and dashed toward Cleansing Flame like a cooling breeze. He had integrated with his environment. Not even Tier 3 players with sharp perception would detect him, let alone a Tier 2 player like Cleansing Flame. 25 yards. 20 yards. 15 yards. As White Rainbow inched closer to Cleansing Flame, he took more care with his movements. When only 10 yards remained between him and his target, the assassin unsheathed his daggers. Just as White Rainbow was about to attack, Shadow Sword, who had been relaxing with his eyes shut, opened them. Without warning, he swung his great sword, sending an energy blade toward Cleansing Flame. It startled the exhausted Guardian Knight. Shadow Sword's energy blade was so sharp that it sliced through the air cleanly, and his execution was so fast that Cleansing Flame had no time to react. Just as she thought she was about to die, however, she heard a metallic clang beside her. The attack had revealed a hidden figure behind her, and when she saw him, she broke out in a cold sweat. Cleansing Flame had never thought that she'd fail to notice someone creeping up to her. Fortunately, Cleansing Flame was a peak expert. Reacting quickly, she leaped forward, creating some distance between her and the nefarious stranger. If an assassin was able to get so close to her undetected, she knew he'd be extraordinarily powerful, and she didn't bother with an offensive or defensive maneuver. Furthermore, the assassin was a Tier 3 player, and she knew she would be no match for him. "You discovered me? It seems you're not such a weakling after all," White Rainbow said, unfazed by the fact that Cleansing Flame had escaped his grasp. He ignored Cleansing Flame and focused his attention on Shadow Sword with an ecstatic expression as he said, "It seems I can take this seriously now." Although his footwork wasn't as masterful as Wind Gull's, detecting him from farther than 7 or 8 yards should be very difficult for ordinary Tier 3 experts. Shadow Sword, however, had noticed him from a little over 10 yards, which proved that the man's combat standards were considerably high. At the very least, Shadow Sword had better perception than an ordinary Tier 3 player. Meanwhile, Wind Gull, who had watched this play out from a short distance away, became just as excited. "Rainbow sure is lucky. I knew I should have started the attack instead," Wind Gull thought, regretting his strategy as he watched Shadow Sword. As he finished that thought, however, another energy blade flew toward him, forcing him to evade and expose himself. Wind Gull spun toward the attack's origin, astonished when he saw who had launched the energy blade. The attack had come from the 5-man party's Tier 3 male Guardian Knight, and based on his accuracy, this Guardian Knight had long since noticed him. Moreover, the Tier 3 female Shield Warrior had clearly sensed him as well. "Who are these people?" Wind Gull stared at Kola and his comrades, surprised. Wind Gull was already amazed that Shadow Sword had discovered White Rainbow, but he found it unbelievable that the party's 2 Tier 3 MTs had discovered him while stealthed as well. When he was in stealth, only his commander and vice commander could sense his presence from 10 yards away, yet these 2 MTs could do the same. For a moment, Wind Gull even wondered if he had really activated stealth. When Cleansing Flame saw White Rainbow and Wind Gull, she paled. "Demon Palace members. Why are they here?" Cleansing Flame had a bad feeling when she saw the 2 Tier 3 Assassins Guild emblems. "Oh, you guys are from Heaven's Blade?" Wind Gull sneered when he saw Heaven's Blade's logo engraved on Cleansing Flame's armor. "This is a good opportunity to get rid of you, then. Rainbow, ignore that female knight. Target their Tier 3s first." "Got it." White Rainbow became serious about this battle and prepared to meld with the shadows once more. "Don't think you can hide from us so easily." Shadow Sword bellowed as he charged at White Rainbow, hacking at the assassin with his great sword. Shadow Sword's attack was simple, but White Rainbow couldn't dodge the strike due to the man's high attack speed. Realizing this, the assassin raised his daggers to block the attack. A loud, metallic clang echoed throughout the tunnel, and the impact threw White Rainbow nearly 6 yards back as he instantly lost more than 20,000 HP. When he landed, he nearly lost his footing as well. How is this possible? Seeing the Berserker throw White Rainbow with a single swing confused Wind Gull. White Gull was familiar with White Rainbow's strength. Not even Tier 3 Berserkers would necessarily be a match for him, yet Shadow Sword had sent the assassin flying with a normal attack. It was simply unbelievable. By the time Wind Gull snapped out of his daze, Turtledove was already using Shield Bash against him. Not daring to be careless, Wind Gull used his short sword and activated his block skill. The moment short sword and shield collided, Wind Gull felt his hand go numb and he stumbled 4 steps back. How is her strength so high too? The situation confused Wind Gull further. He understood how Shadow Sword had overpowered White Rainbow. The man was a Tier 3 Berserker after all, but despite being a Tier 3 Shield Warrior, Turtledove's strength was on par with Shadow Sword's. Wind Gull began to wonder if this small party had suppressed his basic attributes somehow. Naturally, neither Shadow Sword nor Turtledove gave their opponents any room to breathe. They both launched fierce assaults, forcing White Rainbow and Wind Gull to defend themselves, and the 2 assassins fought desperately as they continued to lose HP. The other Demon Palace members who watched from a safe distance were stunned. What? They're actually pushing Rainbow and Gull back? Who are these people? They all knew how powerful the 2 assassins were. Both could effortlessly overpower ordinary Tier 3 players. And yet White Rainbow and Wind Gull were clearly at a disadvantage. At this rate, they'd both die within a minute. "Commander, I'm afraid that Rainbow and Gull won't last long," a handsome white-haired youth surmised to Evil Xian when the 2 Tier 3 assassins had lost more than 1/3 of their HPs. "If we let them die, they'll need a long time to recover. I suppose we'll have to call off this training session," Evil Xian said as he nodded in agreement with his Vice Commander Dark Scorpion's statement. Take a group and save them. Every Tier 3 player was a precious combatant for Demon Palace. He couldn't afford to let the two assassins lose a level during their training. Dark Scorpion grabbed 6 of the team's Tier 3 experts and hurried toward White Rainbow and Wind Gull. When Cleansing Flame noticed 7 more Tier 3 players approach, she felt her scalp tingle, particularly when she saw Dark Scorpion among them. Dark Scorpion was famous on Dragonheart Island. Once he had killed the commanders from 2 of Dragonheart Island's top 10 adventurer teams, instantly becoming one of the most famous players on the island. Individually, he was even stronger than Heaven's Blade's commander, Zvi. If Dark Scorpion's group joined the fray, their party would be doomed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Suddenly, however, a blue lightning bolt arced toward Dark Scorpion and his minions. Seeing this, Dark Scorpion and his allies slid to a halt and attempted to evade the attack. After dodging the lightning bolt, Dark Scorpion's group turned toward the Tier 3 Sword King that had launched the attack. Who are you? Are you trying to make Demon Palace your enemy? Dark Scorpion hissed coldly, glaring at Shifeng's cloaked figure. That lightning bolt had felt lethal to Dark Scorpion, and it was the first time he had felt such a threat since he had reached Tier 3. He didn't dare take this mysterious swordsman lightly. This is a fair one-on-one match. You can't blame me for trying to stop you if you plan on interfering, Shifeng threatened as he returned Killing Ray to its sheath. Chapter 24:15. One strike. Since Shifeng wore a black cloak to conceal his appearance, a dark shadow hid his face. Combined with the Nightwalker's cape, no player could see his features. However, Dark Scorpion and his 6 teammates couldn't help but stare at Shifeng in astonishment after hearing his threat. They even wondered if they had misheard him. Cleansing Flame, on the other hand, nearly choked when she heard Shifeng's statement. She felt he had gone too far with his latest joke. He had practically asked Demon Palace to attack, throwing oil to the fire. Every member of Demon Palace was a battle maniac that had engaged in constant conflict in the demonic hell world. Nobody dared to provoke Demon Palace on Dragonheart Island, not even experts from super guilds. You really are something, kid. You actually dare to speak like that to our vice commander. Bold. You really are bold. This guy must think he's invincible since he's a Tier 3 player. The 6 Demon Palace members beside Dark Scorpion looked at Shifeng as if he were a fool. They had very nearly laughed at his statement. It was the funniest thing they had heard since joining God's domain. Dark Scorpion was a god of death in the Demon Palace. To get used to his Tier 3 form, he had killed over 30 Tier 3 experts after arriving on Dragonheart Island. Not even the various superpowers' old monsters had escaped his grasp and ended up dying. Not even Superpower's vice guild leaders had the courage to speak so boldly to Dark Scorpion, much less Heaven's Blade's commander. Interesting. You're the first person to stand against me since I've come to Dragonheart Island. Contrary to expectations, Dark Scorpion didn't explode in a rage. Rather, he smiled and said, I want to see if you're so brave once we meet in battle. Weeping, seizing, get him. Without hesitation, a shield warrior and a berserker charged toward Shifeng. The two were well coordinated and their movements were far more refined than Wind Gull and White Rainbow. As Weeping Soul and Seizing Soul moved, they left numerous afterimages in their wake. The afterimages continued to crisscross, making it difficult to determine where the two players were. If a player attacked the duo and missed, they'd face a ruthless counterattack. Dread filled Cleansing Flame as she watched from afar. The 2 Tier 3 assassins had already revealed their very high combat standards, but compared to the shield warrior and berserker they were children. Cleansing Flame knew she wouldn't be a match for either of them, even after reaching Tier 3. How does the Demon Palace have so many powerful experts? Cleansing Flame couldn't pinpoint where Weeping Soul and Seizing Soul were. She could only watch as the duo darted toward Shifeng. Once the duo was within 20 yards of Shifeng, however, the swordsman moved. A resplendent arc of lightning flew toward the berserker and shield warrior. Secret technique Lightning Flash. Shifeng had merged all 17 sword lights perfectly. Weeping Soul and Seizing Soul instinctive knew that they couldn't evade the incoming lightning arch, and they both activated a Tier 3 skill to block the attack. Boom. A deafening boom echoed throughout the passage, and both Weeping Soul and Seizing Soul shot backward like bullets, their arms and weapons violently vibrating. Both players were covered in scorch marks and had lost more than half of their HPs. Seizing Soul, the Tier 3 Berserker King in particular, was an inch from death's door. A random strike would be enough to send him to his grave. The duo crashed to the ground and silence filled the passage. Demon Palace's members stared with grim expressions. Weeping Soul and Seizing Soul were veteran peak experts. Their strength ranked among the top 10 of the 50 players on their team. If they hadn't been so powerful, Dark Scorpion wouldn't have sent them to attack someone who could even threaten him. And yet, not only had Shifeng repelled the duo with one attack, but he had also devoured most of their HPs. His strength could definitely be described as horrifying. Not even Dark Scorpion could accomplish such a feat. Meanwhile, the Demon Palace members watching from a distance stared at Shifeng with dropped jaws. They had never thought the swordsman would be powerful enough to suppress two veteran peak experts. Who is this guy? He tossed two Tier 3 peak experts away with a single move. He can likely even rival 13 Thrones' Crazed Sword. Could he be 13 Thrones' Crazed Sword? Demon Palace's members were overcome with confusion and surprise as they looked at Shifeng. This was the first time since the duo had reached Tier 3 that they had seen anyone defeat Weeping Soul and Seizing Soul so thoroughly. When those two worked together, they could even force a Tier 3 Domain Realm expert into a corner. Shifeng, however, had overwhelmed both of them. Even on Dragonheart Island, there were very few with Shifeng's strength. Based on their information, it seemed that 13 Thrones intended to offer its help to Heaven's Blade. With a sword king like Shifeng before them, they assumed he was the Super Guild's Crazed Sword. Crazed Sword, huh? Even Evil Qilan knew he had to take the situation seriously. If their opponent really was 13 Thrones' Crazed Sword, they'd have to be careful. Crazed Sword wasn't just incredibly powerful. He also represented 13 Thrones. Demon Palace might be able to ignore the various super first-rate guilds on Dragonheart Island, but it could not do the same with super guilds. A confrontation with such powerful guilds wouldn't be easy for Demon Palace. It's no wonder why you're so brave. With this kind of strength, you are certainly capable of ranking among the top 20 on Dragonheart Island, but I don't care if you're 13 Thrones' Crazed Sword or not. No matter what, I will interfere. Dark Scorpion snarled as he watched Wind Gull and White Rainbow's HPs fall to a critical low. He immediately removed the two great swords from his back and brandished them at Shifeng. Dark Scorpion's two great swords radiated a dismal glow as they absorbed mana from his surroundings. The weapons also exerted a weak force on all players in the vicinity, pulling them towards the blades. The Vice Commander is finally making a move. With his strength as a Tier 3 demonic fighter, not even 13 Thrones' Crazed Sword is his match. When Dark Scorpion appeared above Shifeng like a phantom, merging his great swords into one gigantic blade, his comrades' eyes glowed with excitement. Dark Scorpion's great swords were the Nether Blades, an epic weapon set, and that move was his trademark. Dark Scorpion had used the move to severely injure a Grand Lord of the same level. If players received this attack, only death awaited them. Moreover, the attack was impossible to dodge since it covered an AoE of 15 by 50 yards. Not even a Domain Realm expert could evade his attack. Die. Looking down at Shifeng, Dark Scorpion swung the gigantic blade. In response, Shifeng unsheathed Killing Ray and countered the descending weapon with a light slash. Although Shifeng's counterattack seemed gentle, everyone saw space split around the weapon. A lightning bolt then toward the gigantic blade among the gloomy blue flames, and a pitch-black tear followed it. Lightning slash. Against the brilliant lightning bolt, Dark Scorpion's merged weapons were as flimsy as paper, and Shifeng's counter-strike sundered the gigantic blade in half as it passed through the weapon. Before anyone could react, Dark Scorpion's blade began to disintegrate, and a fine cut and scorch marks appeared on his body. Like a puppet with cut strings, Dark Scorpion, who still hung in the air, tumbled gracelessly to the ground, an item appearing beside his corpse. He died. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Boo. The Vice Commander's dead? Impossible. Demon Palace's members panicked, unable to pull their astonished gazes away from Dark Scorpion's corpse. They couldn't believe that someone had killed him with a single hit. Everyone turned toward Shifeng, overwhelmed by fear and curiosity. Suddenly, Evil Qilan realized something. With a grim expression, he turned to Shifeng and asked, "Sword King Black Flame?"